The enchanted ceiling of the great hall had been displaying a pleasant autumn evening when Harry first sat down to dinner. Wispy clouds drifting across a deepening blue sky, the occasional star beginning to twinkle into existence. He'd been reaching for the shepherd's pie when Hermione's fork clattered against her plate. "That's not right," she said, staring upward. Ron paused mid-chew, following her gaze. "What's not right? Looks normal to me." "It was clear 5 minutes ago," Hermione whispered. "Now, look." Harry tilted his head back. She was right. The enchanted sky had transformed with unsettling speed. Heavy grey clouds now churned across the ceiling, roiling and darkening as they watched, as if some invisible hand was kneading the heavens into a single bruised mass. The stars, those gentle points of light, were swallowed one by one, until the ceiling was nothing but layered shadow. A hush began to creep through the hall, spreading like a ripple. Cutlery slowed, conversations faltered. Even the clatter of plates seemed to soften, as though the castle itself had drawn in a careful breath. The temperature dropped perceptibly. Students near the doors tugged their robes tighter. Someone at the Ravenclaw table muttered a nervous joke that didn't land. A few first years looked ready to cry. "Blimey," Ron said, lowering his fork. "That's moving fast." Professor Flitwick stood up on his bench at the staff table, peering upward with bright-eyed fascination, as though the ceiling were a complicated charm he couldn't wait to study. "Remarkable," he squeaked, hands clasped. "The ceiling is responding to, well, something, certainly." Professor Sprout's kindly face tightened with concern. She glanced towards the enchanted sky, then toward the doors, then to the far windows along the hall's side walls, as if expecting wind to begin battering them from the outside too. Hagrid, who was seated at the very end of the staff table as always, craned his thick neck back. His brow furrowed, and that alone made Harry's stomach sink slightly. Hagrid rarely looked worried unless something truly odd was happening. At the head of the staff table, Professor Dumbledore sat perfectly still, fingers steepled, eyes lifted. He wasn't smiling. That was the part that made Harry's throat go dry. The great golden candles floating above them flickered, their flames thinning as if struck by a passing draught. For a second, a pale tremor of light shivered through the hall, so faint it might have been imagined, yet Harry felt it in his bones, like the softest vibration through stone. Hermione leaned toward Harry and Ron, voice low. "The great hall ceiling is charmed to reflect the sky outside. But it's also—" She hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "It's also keyed to the castle. It has protective enchantments layered in, old ones. If it's changing like this so quickly, it might not just be weather." Ron's ears were going slightly pink, as they sometimes did when Hermione launched into explanation mode. "So what, you're saying the ceiling's scared?" "I'm saying," Hermione replied, "that something is triggering the castle's magic." Harry stared upward again. The clouds were moving with purpose now, swirling in slow spirals that tugged at each other, folding and folding, until the center of the ceiling darkened into something deeper than shadow. It looked like a knot in the sky. A pressure settled behind Harry's eyes. Not painful, but strange. Like being underwater without the water. He blinked hard, trying to shake it off. Then, without warning, a sound rolled through the great hall. Not thunder, exactly. It was softer, heavier. A deep, distant hum that felt less like noise and more like a pulse. The candles dipped in unison. The plates on the table shivered. A few goblets tipped over and spilled pumpkin juice in bright orange rivers. Several students gasped. A handful of owls up in the rafters fluttered and shifted, feathers stirring as though they too felt the tremor. Somewhere near the Hufflepuff table, a boy yelped as his custard tart slid right off his plate. Professor McGonagall stood sharply, chair scraping. Her voice cracked through the hall like a firm slap of order. It worked immediately. Even the oldest students straightened, instinctively obeying. Dumbledore rose more slowly, and when he stood, the room seemed to stand with him, as if everyone's attention had been pulled by an unseen thread. "Prefects," Dumbledore said, and he didn't raise his voice, but it carried perfectly. "Please remain calm. Assist the first years. Keep everyone seated." His gaze moved across the hall, calm but keen. "Professors, if you would." The staff rose. Flitwick hopped down from his bench, wand already out, his expression now less delighted and more focused. McGonagall swept down the staff table with her robe snapping, speaking to the nearest prefects. Professor Snape stood with his arms folded, black eyes fixed on the ceiling as though it offended him personally. Professor Sprout herded the Hufflepuff first years into a tighter cluster with one gentle hand on their shoulders. Hagrid leaned toward Dumbledore and murmured something Harry couldn't hear. Dumbledore nodded once, then lifted his wand. The tip glowed faintly. A shimmer spread through the air above the 4 house tables, like the faintest curtain being drawn. Harry felt the pressure behind his eyes ease slightly, as if Dumbledore had just turned down the volume on whatever strange pulse the castle had given off. Hermione exhaled. Just a little. Ron swallowed. "Okay," he murmured to Harry, voice thin. "I'm officially not enjoying dinner anymore." Harry didn't answer. His gaze was locked on the ceiling. The knot in the clouds was tightening, a circle of darkness forming at the center of the great hall's enchanted sky, not like an opening, more like a bruise deepening. The swirling clouds drew toward it in slow spirals. The effect was hypnotic, in a terrible sort of way. Then a flicker of light cut through it. Not lightning. It was pale and silvery, a thread of brightness that seemed to split the darkness from within, like the first crack in ice. It widened slightly, then closed again, leaving the ceiling darker than before. All around the hall, whispers tried to start up again. Questions, fear, speculation. "Is it you know who?" someone hissed. "No, he's gone. Maybe it's Dementors. Dementors don't do that." McGonagall's eyes flashed. "Enough." Dumbledore held up a hand, and even McGonagall stopped mid-glare, though she looked like she'd like to deduct points from the entire student body just for breathing too loudly. Dumbledore's gaze returned to the ceiling. He spoke quietly to Flitwick and Sprout, then to Snape. Snape's lip curled slightly, but he nodded and moved away, gliding toward the doors at the back of the staff table. Hermione tugged Harry's sleeve. "Harry," she whispered. "What?" Harry whispered back, though he didn't take his eyes away. Hermione looked pale now, and that was rare. "Do you feel strange?" Harry blinked and finally looked at her. Her eyes were wide behind her glasses. Ron was staring too, chewing his lip. Harry hesitated. "A bit," he admitted. "Like pressure. Like when you go too deep underwater." Hermione swallowed. "Me too." Ron frowned. "I thought that was just me being hungry." Hermione shot him a look. "Ron." Ron shrugged, but his attempt at humor didn't land. "Right. Sorry." Another hum rolled through the hall. This time the sound was accompanied by a visible shimmer across the enchanted ceiling, like ripples across a black lake. The knot tightened, then loosened, like something breathing. A candle went out, then another. For a heartbeat the hall dipped toward darkness, until the candles flared back up again, flames steadying themselves with stubborn, golden defiance. A tiny sob came from a first year near the Gryffindor table. A prefect leaned down, murmuring reassurance. It's all right, just a charm acting up. Professor Dumbledore's here. Harry's stomach clenched. He didn't like the way the prefect said Dumbledore's name, like it was a shield you held up against the unknown, because Dumbledore was a shield. And the fact that everyone needed reminding of it made Harry feel like the world had shifted slightly under his feet. Up at the staff table, Dumbledore lifted his wand again, tracing a slow, careful pattern in the air. His expression was thoughtful now, not frightened, but deeply attentive, like a wizard listening to a complicated spell and trying to identify where a single note had gone sour. Flitwick followed his movements, nodding rapidly, as if recognizing the structure of what Dumbledore was doing. The shimmering curtain of protection above the tables brightened. Harry felt the pressure behind his eyes ease a little more. But the ceiling did not calm. The knot darkened further. And then, right at the center of it, the clouds split. A narrow opening appeared. Just a sliver, like the eye of a needle piercing fabric. Through it was not the normal night sky. It was something else. Grey, yes, but deeper. Not weather grey, not cloud grey. It looked like distance, like looking down a very long corridor made of shadow and stone, with faint, pale light. Far away. Harry's breath caught. Beside him, Hermione made a small sound that might have been a gasp swallowed into a whimper. Ron's mouth fell open. For a second, the entire Great Hall seemed to collectively forget how to breathe. Then, softly, impossibly, there was a whisper. Not spoken by any student. Not shouted. Not hissed. It was a whisper that seemed to come from everywhere at once, drifting through the air like cold mist. And Harry couldn't make out the words, but he could feel their shape. Like someone calling. Kane! Like someone reaching. His scar prickled. Not pain. Not like it used to in the worst moments. Just awareness. A warning. Harry, Hermione breathed, gripping his arm so tightly it hurt. Harry, your scar. I know, Harry whispered, though he wasn't sure he did. He stared at the slit in the clouds, his pulse hammering. The opening widened a fraction. The strange corridor beyond it became clearer. Stone arches, faint glimmers of light, a suggestion of something moving far away. Not a person, more like shifting shadow. And then the whisper came again. Closer, still unreadable. But the tone, it felt like pleading. It felt like urgency. At the staff table, Dumbledore's wand snapped upward. A bright silver line shot into the air, striking the center of the ceiling with a crack like splitting wood. The slit in the clouds shuddered. The corridor beyond flickered like a reflection disturbed. The opening narrowed slightly, but it didn't close. Dumbledore's eyes sharpened. He spoke quietly, urgently, to McGonagall and Flitwick. McGonagall's mouth tightened. She looked from the ceiling to Dumbledore, then to the students, and Harry saw a flash of something rare in her expression, fear. It vanished quickly, replaced by stern focus. Prefects, she called. Students will return to their common rooms. Days, in orderly lines. First years first. A wave of movement began. Benches scraped. Students stood uncertainly, clutching bags, looking up again and again. The great hall became a rustle of robes, a low chorus of nervous whispers. Everyone stay together, a prefect shouted. Keep your wands away unless you're a prefect. First years with me, no running. Ron, Hermione said quickly. voice trembling with the effort of control. We should go with the others. Ron was still staring upward, but Harry didn't move. He couldn't. The opening, whatever it was, had a pull to it, like gravity, like a question you couldn't stop thinking about once it was asked. He felt it in his chest. A tug. And in the middle of it all, the whisper seemed to turn toward him. Harry. This time, he thought he heard his name. Or maybe he only imagined it because his mind was desperate to assign meaning to the sound. Hermione tugged him again. Harry. Harry blinked hard, forcing his feet to move. They joined the press of Gryffindors being shepherded toward the doors. Percy Weasley, looking very serious and very important, was directing traffic with sharp gestures. Gryffindors this way. Stay calm. No pushing. Angelina Johnson was helping herd the younger students. Fred and George were weirdly quiet, which might have been the most alarming thing of all. As they moved, Harry glanced back. Dumbledore stood alone beneath the darkest part of the ceiling, wand raised, his silhouette framed by candlelight. Professors clustered nearby, forming a small ring of readiness. And the opening in the clouds. End. The corridors outside the Great Hall were cooler than usual, as though the castle had shifted into a different season. Torches along the walls burned steadily, but their flames seemed thinner, stretched. Students flowed into the hallways in streams, guided by prefects who were trying very hard to look confident. Their voices echoed strangely, muffled in places, clearer in others, as if the stone itself was listening. Ron stayed close to Harry and Hermione. Tell me we're not the only ones who saw that. No, Hermione said tightly. Everyone saw it? But nobody's saying what it is, Ron muttered. Hermione's hands were clenched around her books like she was holding herself together through them. Because nobody knows. Or because the professors don't want panic. Ron huffed. Bit late for that. They reached the moving staircases, where the usual chaos of shifting steps felt suddenly less like a quirky Hogwarts feature and more like a nervous system twitching beneath their feet. The stairs creaked and rotated, pausing longer than usual, as if choosing where to send them. A portrait of a plump witch near the stairs was muttering to herself. Not again. Not again. Always when it's quiet. Harry slowed. What did she say? Hermione heard too. She stepped closer to the portrait. Excuse me. What do you mean, not again? The witch in the portrait startled as if she'd forgotten she could be spoken to. She blinked at Hermione, then at Harry, and her eyes widened. She whispered. It's you. Ron bristled. Oi, what's that supposed to mean? The witch's mouth tightened. She glanced toward the direction of the great hall, as if she could still feel the ceiling's strange pulse from here. I mean, the castle has been restless. Restless like this. Only when old doors start remembering, they can open. Hermione's face drained of color. Old doors? Old doors. But before the portrait could answer, Professor McGonagall's voice rang down the corridor. Miss Granger. Mr. Weasley. Mr. Potter. They all froze. McGonagall strode towards them, robe hems snapping. Her expression was sharp, but there was something under it, an urgency she was working hard to conceal. You are to return directly to your common room, she said briskly. Hermione swallowed. Professor, what is happening? The ceiling. McGonagall's gaze flicked toward Harry for a brief, measuring second. It is being handled Ron's eyebrows shot up. Handled? It looked like Mr. Weasley, McGonagall said, and her tone was a warning bell. Not everything you see requires your commentary. Ron shut his mouth, grumpy but cowed. Hermione tried again, more quietly. Professor, is the castle in danger? McGonagall held Hermione's gaze. For a moment, the sternness softened, just a fraction. Hogwarts has stood through worse than strange weather, she said. But yes, you must stay together tonight, and you must listen to your prefects. Harry's scar gave another faint prick, like a needle brushing skin. McGonagall's eyes sharpened again. Mr. Potter. Harry met her gaze. Come with me, she said. Ron's mouth dropped open. What? Hermione stepped forward at once. Professor, not you, McGonagall said, and it was firm but not unkind. Mr. Potter, now. Harry's heart thumped hard. He glanced at Ron and Hermione. Hermione looked like she wanted to argue until the sun burned out. Ron looked like he wanted to punch something and didn't know what. McGonagall softened her tone by the smallest degree. Return to your common room. Both of you. Hermione's lips pressed together. Yes, Professor. Ron looked mutinous, but Hermione elbowed him. Harry followed McGonagall. They walked quickly, cutting through corridors that twisted into quieter, older parts of the castle. The sounds of students faded behind them. The air grew colder, and the stone walls seemed to lean in. Harry tried to speak. Professor McGonagall held up a hand. Not yet. They turned a corner, descended a narrow staircase, and stopped before a plain stretch of wall. McGonagall raised her wand. The wall shimmered. A door appeared. Smooth, dark wood, with iron hinges that looked older than most things Harry had ever seen. There was no handle, only a small indentation in the shape of a hand. McGonagall looked at Harry. Place your hand there. Harry hesitated. Why? Because, McGonagall said, voice tight, the castle is calling to you whether you like it or not, and I would rather you answer in a controlled environment than wander after it alone at midnight like a fool. Harry's stomach flipped. He placed his palm in the indentation. The door warmed beneath his hand, just slightly, like skin. The stone around it vibrated softly, like a purr. The door opened. Beyond it was not a corridor. It was a room, round and dim, lit by pale blue flame in sconces. The air smelled like old parchment, beeswax, and something metallic, like the air before lightning. In the center of the room stood a basin of stone. A pensieve. Dumbledore was there. So was Professor Flitwick and Professor Snape, standing in the shadows, arms folded, eyes like knives. And on the far side of the room, half hidden by the curve of the wall, stood a tall cabinet of dark wood, so tall it nearly touched the ceiling. Its surface was carved with twisting symbols Harry didn't recognize. It seemed wrong, somehow, like it didn't belong in the castle, and yet had always been there. Harry couldn't stop staring at it. Dumbledore turned, and for the first time since dinner began, he smiled slightly. But it wasn't a warm, twinkling smile. It was the smile of someone who has recognized a problem and is preparing to meet it head on. Dumbledore said softly, Harry. Harry swallowed. Sir. McGonagall stepped aside, letting Harry into the room. The door closed behind him with a gentle click that sounded much louder than it should have. Dumbledore gestured to the cabinet. Do you know what that is? Harry stared. The carved symbols seemed to shift when he tried to focus on them. No, he admitted. But it feels like the thing in the ceiling. Snape's voice cut in, cold and sharp. Of course it does. Dumbledore's gaze remained calm. This, he said, is an old threshold. Flitwick nodded rapidly, looking both anxious and fascinated. Ancient, really, very ancient. McGonagall's mouth was set in a hard line. It should not be stirring. Dumbledore's eyes returned to Harry. And yet it is. Harry's scar prickled again, faint but unmistakable. Dumbledore's voice gentled. Harry, the castle responds to many things. Love, fear, danger, joy. But sometimes it responds to history. He stepped closer to the cabinet without touching it. The air around it seemed thicker, like invisible glass. Long ago, Dumbledore said quietly, there were doors built into places like Hogwarts. Not literal doors for students to walk through, but magical thresholds, boundaries between what is here and what is elsewhere. Harry's mouth went dry. Elsewhere where? Dumbledore didn't answer immediately. His gaze flicked to Snip, then back. Somewhere old, he said at last. Somewhere that remembers the castle, even if the castle has tried to forget it. Flitwick swallowed audibly. There have been stirrings in other places too. McGonagall's eyes flashed at Flitwick. You told him? Flitwick wrung his hands. We agreed. If the threshold woke, we'd need to, well, you know. Snape's voice was pure disdain. Chatter like frightened pixies while the castle cracks open, yes. McGonagall's glare could have frozen fire. Dumbledore lifted a hand, quieting them all with ease. He looked at Harry again, and the room seemed to hold its breath. You felt the whisper, Dumbledore said. Harry nodded, barely. I think so. And your scar? Dumbledore asked gently. Harry hesitated. It didn't hurt like before, but it reacted. Snape's lip curled. Predictable. Dumbledore ignored him. The scar is not only a wound, Harry. It is a bond, a mark of magic that was forced into you. Harry's chest tightened. So this threshold is connected to Voldemort? McGonagall stiffened at the name. Flitwick flinched. Snape's eyes narrowed. Dumbledore's expression remained calm, but his gaze sharpened. Not directly, he said. But it may be connected to the kind of magic that created such bonds. Ancient magic. Old doors. Harry stared at the cabinet. The carved symbols looked like vines, or serpents, or branches, twisting into patterns that made his eyes want to slide away. What's inside it? Harry asked, voice barely more than a whisper. Flitwick's voice trembled. We don't, well, we do, but we don't know, you see. McGonagall cut in sharply. It has been sealed for centuries. Snape's voice was silk over poison, because whatever is behind it is best left behind it. Dumbledore stepped closer to Harry, and his voice softened again. Hogwarts is a place of learning, he said, but it is also a place of protection. Sometimes those two purposes disagree. He held Harry's gaze. Tonight, the ceiling did not show us a storm. It showed us a doorway trying to open. Harry's stomach dropped. Open to what? Dumbledore's eyes flicked to the pensieve, then back to Harry. To an old passage. Dumbledore said quietly. One that does not exist on any map the students have ever seen. Snape snorted softly. And we are debating this with a child. McGonagall rounded on Snape. He is not a child in the ways that matter. Snape's eyes gleamed. How sentimental. Dumbledore's gaze sharpened, and the air in the room seemed to still. Severus, he said softly. Snape fell silent, but his expression remained carved from disapproval. Dumbledore turned back to Harry. We brought you here, he said, because the threshold recognizes you. And because if it opens, you will likely be pulled toward it, whether you mean to be or not. Harry's mouth felt full of sand. So, what do we do? Dumbledore's eyes softened. We learn, he said, quickly, carefully, and with every protection we can manage. He gestured toward the pensieve. There is something you must see. Harry stared at the basin. The silvery memory inside swirled gently, like moonlight poured into water. McGonagall stepped closer to Harry. Her voice dropped, and for the first time she sounded almost kind in a quiet, guarded way. You will be safe here, she said. Do you understand? This is the safest place we can put you while the castle is unsettled. Harry nodded, though he didn't feel safe. Not truly. Dumbledore took a small vial from his robe and tipped a thin stream of silver into the pensieve. The memory brightened, swirling into a slow spiral. This, Dumbledore said softly, is a record from long ago. A moment when Hogwarts felt this same restlessness, Harry stared. Has this happened before? Flitwick's voice was almost a whisper. Not in our lifetimes. Snape's voice was colder, and for good reason. Dumbledore looked at Harry steadily. Will you look, Harry? Harry swallowed. Then he stepped forward. He leaned over the pensieve and let the silvery surface pull him in. The world tilted. Cold rushed past Harry like a wind that had never seen sunlight. The room vanished. The stone, the professors, the cabinet, gone. Harry landed in a corridor. But it wasn't a corridor he knew. The stone was older, darker. The torches were not bright gold, but a dim, pale blue. The air smelled like wet rock and iron. The walls were carved with the same twisting symbols he'd seen on the cabinet, and they seemed to shift slightly as he moved, like the carvings were watching him pass. A figure walked ahead. A man, tall, robed, moving with purpose. For one wild heartbeat, Harry thought it was Dumbledore. But the stride was different. The shoulders were different. The man turned slightly, and Harry caught a glimpse of a profile. Stern, sharp, unfamiliar. And then voices echoed ahead. Harry hurried forward, pulled by the memory. He rounded a corner and saw a group of witches and wizards standing before a door. Not a normal door. A door that looked like the great hall ceiling's opening, made solid, an archway of shadow and stone, with pale light seeping through its seams. The witches and wizards were tense, wands out. Their faces were lit by the strange pale glow, making them look older, harder, like people who'd had to defend something for too long. A woman in the front spoke in a low voice Harry couldn't quite catch. Her hair was pinned up severely. Her robes were heavy with age. A man Harry followed answered her. Then the pale light from the doorway pulsed. The entire corridor shuddered, and from behind the door came that whisper again, the same whisper Harry had heard in the great hall. Only now it was clearer. Not fully clear, but clearer enough that Harry understood one thing with terrifying certainty. It was not calling to Hogwarts. It was calling from somewhere that wanted to get back in. The memory's air grew colder. The doorway's seams brightened. Someone in the group shouted, raising their wand. The pale light surged, and the door began to open. The pale light surged, and the door began to open, not with a creak, not with a groan of hinges, but with the slow, deliberate certainty of something that had been waiting a very long time and had finally heard the right note. Harry stood in the corridor of the memory, breath caught in his throat, watching the seam of the archway widen by the width of a wand, then a hand, then a finger's length more. The air around it shimmered as if heated, yet everything felt colder, like the corridor's stones had forgotten how to hold warmth. The witches and wizards before the doorway tightened their grip on their wands. No one ran. No, screamed. They stood like people who had already decided they would not be moved, even if the castle itself shook. The woman at the front, severe hair, heavy robes, raised her wand higher. "Hold," she said, voice low and steady. The pale light spilling through the opening brightened, and for a heartbeat Harry thought he saw something through it. Not a creature. A long, long hall of shadow and stone, like a corridor carved into the inside of night. The arches within it were too tall, the angles too clean, the perspective too deep, as if distance behaved differently there. Far away, faint points of light hovered and drifted, like lanterns or stars caught indoors. Then the whisper came again, threading through the crack, like mist slipping beneath the door. This time, the sound did not fill the great hall. It filled the corridor itself, brushing along the carvings in the stone, catching on the symbols like wind through reeds. Harry leaned forward without meaning to. He could not understand the words, not clearly, but the shape of them pressed against his mind. Urgent, pleading, familiar in the way a melody can feel familiar even if you've never heard it before. The man Harry had followed, tall, robed, stern profile, stepped half a pace forward, then stopped as if some invisible line across the floor had warned him. He spoke, and the sound snapped through the corridor like a spell cast into still water. "Name yourself." The whisper paused. The pale light pulsed once, as if considering the question. Then the corridor beyond the doorway shifted. The distant points of light gathered, drawing inward like moths turning toward a flame. The archway's seam widened by another inch, and Harry saw more of the place beyond, stone steps descending into darkness, a floor that seemed to be both solid and misty, like glass laid over fog. The whisper returned, softer now, almost tender. A name brushed Harry's awareness, like a cold fingertip tracing a scar. Not Voldemort, not anything he recognized. Just a sound that tasted like dust and old parchment, like candle smoke and rain on stone. The severe woman's jaw tightened. "It knows you," she said to the stern man. "No," he replied, and his voice had the sharp calm of someone making a dangerous distinction. "It knows the castle." A shudder ran through the corridor. The torches flared. The carvings on the walls seemed to darken, as if ink had been poured into their grooves. The severe woman lifted her wand. "Shield." The group moved as one, wands rising, tips glowing. A low hum filled the air, and Harry felt it in his teeth. A pale barrier shivered into place across the corridor, not sealing the doorway, but bracing the space around it, like someone holding a doorframe steady while something on the other side pushed. The stern man's robe stirred, though there was no wind. He looked at the archway, eyes narrowed, and spoke again, this time not as a question, but as an accusation.
You are not invited.
For a heartbeat, everything held still. Then the whisper came again. And this time, Harry caught something clear enough to understand, not the full sentence, but the core of it. A single phrase that sank into the air with the weight of truth. We were once inside. The severe woman's face went pale, in a way that had nothing to do with the torchlight. The stern man did not flinch, but Harry saw his hand tighten around his wand until his knuckles were white. Once, the man said, voice controlled, is not now. The archway responded by widening. Not much. Not dramatically. Just enough. And Harry saw what lay just beyond the threshold. Not a monster. Not a swarm. A hall. A vast space like an underground cathedral, carved from shadowed stone that seemed slightly wet, slightly gleaming, as if the place held its own kind of weather. Tall pillars rose and vanished into darkness overhead. Between them, thin ribbons of pale light drifted, looping slowly like silent birds. It was beautiful in the way a winter night can be beautiful. Quiet and cold and too vast to be friendly. And yet, the whisper felt like yearning. Harry felt the pull again, stronger now, like gravity tugging at his ribs. The severe woman must have felt something similar because she barked, "Brace! It's pressing!" The barrier shivered. The humming deepened. The corridor's stone under Harry's feet vibrated, as if the castle itself were trying to decide whether to help or to flee. The stern man did something Harry did not expect. He lowered his wand. Not fully, just slightly. The group behind him made startled sounds, small, sharp intakes of breath. "What are you doing?" someone hissed. The stern man did not look back. He stared at the opening like a scholar staring at a problem he'd seen before. "Listen," he murmured. And Harry listened. At first there was only the hum of magic and the soft hiss of torches. Then, beneath it, something else. A rhythm. A steady pulse that did not belong to any heartbeat in the corridor. It was like a knock, not on the archway, on the castle. As if whatever lay beyond was tapping on Hogwarts' bones, searching for a weak seam. The stern man's voice went colder. It's not trying to force the door. The severe woman's eyes flicked to him. Then what is it doing? He spoke as if the answer tasted bitter. It's reminding the door that it exists. The whisper flowed again, and the pale light brightened, and Harry felt, very clearly, very suddenly, that the place beyond the threshold wasn't merely outside the castle. It was adjacent, like a room built behind a wall you'd always believed was solid. A space the castle had once had a reason to keep. A space it had later decided to forget. The severe woman stepped forward until she was nearly at the line the stern man had stopped at. She raised her wand, and the tip gleamed with fierce white light. "Enough," she said. "We seal it now." "But it's awake," someone behind her protested, voice tight. "If we seal it while it's awake, if we do not seal it," the severe woman snapped, "it will wake more fully." The stern man's gaze sharpened. "We cannot simply shove a sleeping problem back under a floorboard," he said quietly. "Not if the floorboard has begun to move." The severe woman looked at him for a long moment. Then her expression shifted from fear to decision. "Then we bind it," she said. "Properly, permanently." The word permanently hung in the air like frost. She turned to the others. "To your positions." The group moved, splitting into 4 points around the corridor, like the corners of an invisible square. They stood with deliberate spacing, each one stepping to a mark in the stone that Harry hadn't noticed before. marks that weren't scratches. They were runes, old ones, worn by time but still faintly pulsing, like embers hidden under ash. The severe woman raised her wand to the ceiling and spoke a long incantation in a language Harry didn't understand. It sounded like stone sliding against stone, like wind passing through hollow places. The corridor's carvings lit up in response. The symbols along the walls glowed faintly, then brighter, like veins filling with light. The archway shuddered. The place beyond flickered, as if the threshold was suddenly seeing itself through a new lens. The stern man lifted his wand again, but instead of aiming at the doorway, he traced a careful circle in the air, and the circle hung there, a ring of pale light. Inside it, the air looked thicker, like glass. The others did the same at their corners. 4 rings. 4 anchors. The corridor's hum changed. It turned from a vibration into a chord. Then the severe woman pointed her wand directly at the archway. "By stone that stands," she said. One of the 4 witches echoed. "By water that remembers," another echoed. "By flame that guards," another echoed. "By air that carries." Harry's skin prickled, not because it felt sinister, because it felt ancient, like hearing the first words ever spoken in a place. The severe woman's voice sharpened into something like command. "By the castle's will, close." The rings of light flared. The corridor brightened all at once, and the archway's pale seams spasmed, widening as if in panic. And for the briefest, clearest moment, the whisper burst through, not pleading now, but urgent, desperate, strained, as if the voice had realized time was running out. "Do not shut." The words broke apart in the air as the magic struck. The archway snapped narrower, like a mouth biting down. The pale light thinned to a thread. The corridor beyond blurred, like a reflection smeared by a hand. The whisper surged again, but it was muffled now, like someone shouting through stone. The stern man's face tightened, and he spoke one final phrase in that harsh, old language. The runes in the floor flared bright white. The archway sealed, with a sound like a deep bell rung underwater. Silence fell, not the comfortable silence of a library, but the heavy silence that follows when something dangerous has just been forced back into a box. The torches steadied. The corridor's stones stopped vibrating. The runes dimmed, though not fully, like wards left half awake, ready to flare again at the first sign of trouble. The severe woman lowered her wand slowly, as though her arms had become too heavy to lift. Someone exhaled shakily. Someone else whispered, "Is it done?" The stern man stared at the now solid archway. Just stone again. Just wall again. Just corridor. "No," he said quietly. "It is contained." The severe woman's voice was tight. "For how long?" The stern man did not answer at first. He looked down at the runes in the floor, then at the carvings on the walls, then at the places where the 4 rings of light had been. His gaze lingered, as if he could see a hairline crack in something everyone else believed was whole. Then he said softly, "Until the castle chooses to remember it again." The severe woman's eyes flashed. "The castle will not choose that." The stern man's expression was grim. "Castles do not choose," he said. "They respond." He turned slightly, looking down the corridor in the direction Harry had come from. The memory's air felt heavier now, like it had absorbed what had happened and was deciding how to store it. "Write it," the stern man said to one of the others. "Record this night. Record the runes. Record the binding. And record the warning." The severe woman's mouth tightened. "What warning?" The stern man stared at the sealed stone for a long time. Then he said, as though repeating words he did not wish to give power to, "It said, it was once inside." The severe woman's face hardened. "Then we will make sure it never returns." The stern man's voice was quiet, almost sorrowful. "You can lock a door," he said, "but you cannot stop a place from having a hinge." Harry felt the memory begin to thin at the edges. The corridor blurred. The torches stretched into streaks of light. The last thing Harry saw was the severe woman pressing her palm against the stone where the archway had been, as if feeling for warmth that shouldn't exist. Then everything tilted, and Harry was falling upward, out of the memory, out of the corridor of old stone and older magic, back into the present. He stumbled, catching himself on the rim of the pensieve. The office swam around him. Blue flames in sconces, familiar stone walls, the weight of air that belonged to now. He inhaled sharply, like a swimmer breaking the surface. Dumbledore's hand steadied his shoulder, gentle but firm. "Easy," Dumbledore murmured. Harry blinked hard. His heart was hammering. His palms felt cold. McGonagall stood close by, eyes sharp, watching him as if she could see the memory still clinging to his skin. Flitwick hovered anxiously, hands clasped, as though he couldn't decide whether to look thrilled or terrified. Snape stood in shadow as if he had been born there, expression unreadable. Harry swallowed. "It opened," he said immediately, voice hoarse. The door in the corridor, just a crack. And it wasn't weather. It was a place. Dumbledore's gaze did not change, but something behind his eyes tightened, like a knot being pulled. "A place," Dumbledore repeated softly. Harry nodded, struggling to arrange what he had felt into words. It looked like a hall, huge, not scary exactly, but cold, too big, too old. Flitwick made a small, involuntary sound, half wonder, half dread. "The between," he whispered. McGonagall shot him a look. "Do not forget my teaching. Do not forget my teaching." Snape's voice drifted from the shadows. He already felt it. The name won't harm him. Truth might. McGonagall's nostrils flared. Dumbledore lifted a hand, and the room settled, as if even their arguments respected the gesture. Harry looked at Dumbledore. "It whispered," he said. And then it said something clearly. It said, "We were once inside." Silence struck the room like a spell. Flitwick's face went pale. McGonagall's mouth tightened so hard it looked painful. Snape's eyes narrowed, sharp with recognition and displeasure. Dumbledore closed his eyes briefly, as if acknowledging a long-feared answer. "Thank you," Dumbledore said quietly. Harry frowned. "Sir, what is it? What is it?" Dumbledore looked at him, and his voice remained calm, but the calm had edges now. "There are pockets of magic," he said, "that form alongside great works. Hogwarts is not only a building. It is a spell held in stone. Over centuries, the castle's enchantments have folded and layered and intertwined." He gestured slightly, as though indicating not only the room, but the entire castle beyond it. "Sometimes, places like this cast shadows. Not shadows of darkness, Harry, but shadows of structure, echoes, adjacent rooms. Hallways that exist because the castle's magic once needed them, and later did not." Harry's throat felt tight. "So it's like an extra part of Hogwarts. McGonagall's voice came sharp. No, Dumbledore's gaze softened toward her, then returned to Harry. Not quite, he said. It is not Hogwarts, but it is near enough to remember what Hogwarts is made of. Harry stared at the tall cabinet across the room, the one carved with shifting symbols. Dumbledore followed his gaze, remarked. That cabinet, Dumbledore said, is not a cupboard for things. It is an anchor point, a way of touching a sealed threshold without letting it fully touch you. Harry swallowed. And the ceiling? The ceiling reacted, Dumbledore said, because the Great Hall sits above one of the strongest crossings of the castle's enchantments. Old magic gathers there like water, collects in a basin. Flitwick nodded rapidly. It's a convergence point, you see, one of the oldest in the castle. Everything passes through there, magically speaking. Harry's scar prickled faintly, as if it agreed. Dumbledore's voice gentled. Harry, he said, you were right to feel the pull. If a door like this stirs, it seeks what it can recognize, a signature, a familiar thread of magic. Snape's voice was cold. And Mr. Potter is practically a tapestry of familiar threads, isn't he? Harry's jaw clenched. McGonagall's eyes flashed. Enough. Dumbledore didn't look at Snape, but his tone carried quiet steel. Severus. Snape fell silent again, though his disapproval lingered like a chill in the corner. Harry looked between them. So, it recognizes me because of my scar? Dumbledore hesitated just long enough for Harry to notice. Partly, Dumbledore said. The mark on your forehead has been touched by ancient magic, magic older than the spells we teach in classrooms. Dialogue, bud, boke, syllop, cinema. Harry's stomach tightened. Voldemort. Tom Riddle, Dumbledore corrected softly, and there was something deliberate in the use of the name, as if pinning a dangerous thing to a smaller shape. Harry swallowed. So this door is connected to him. McGonagall's voice turned very firm. No, not connected in the way you fear, Flitwick added quickly. It's more like two storms sharing the same wind, if you understand. Dumbledore nodded. The door responds to old power. It responds to deep enchantment. It responds to certain wounds in the world. Harry's hands curled into fists. And it said it was once inside. Dumbledore's expression was thoughtful. Yes. Harry felt anger spark through the fear. So it's been in Hogwarts before, and nobody told us? McGonagall's eyes sharpened. Harry, Dumbledore lifted a hand again, and McGonagall stopped, though she looked displeased with the universe. Dumbledore's voice remained gentle. No one told you, he said, because no one wished to give you another burden. Harry stared at him, breathing hard through his nose. Dumbledore continued, but tonight, a castle has changed the rules, and so we must as well. Flitwick swallowed. Albus, are we going to reinforce the binding? Dumbledore nodded once. Yes. McGonagall's voice was low. And we will keep the students in their common rooms. Snape's lip curled faintly. If panic doesn't do the work for us. McGonagall's glare could have cut stone. Dumbledore ignored the jab. He looked at Harry. Harry, I am going to ask something of you, he said quietly. Harry's stomach sank. What? Dumbledore held his gaze steadily. I need you to remain close tonight, not as punishment. Not because you are in trouble, but because if the door presses again, if the castle shifts again, your presence may draw it. Harry's mouth went dry. So I'm bait. McGonagall bristled. Absolutely not. Dumbledore's voice stayed calm. Not bait, he said. An anchor and an alarm, Harry swallowed. That doesn't sound much better. Dumbledore's eyes softened, and for the first time since dinner, there was a faint warmth in them. I would not ask if there were another option, he said, and I will not put you in danger unnecessarily. But I must be honest with you. Harry forced himself to nod. Dumbledore turned to McGonagall. Minerva, please ensure the corridors are cleared. I would like the head boy and head girl to assist. McGonagall nodded sharply and moved toward the door. Dumbledore looked at Flitwick. Phileas, I will need your hands on the wards beneath the Great Hall. Flitwick straightened, swallowing. Of course, of course. Dumbledore's gaze slid to Snape, Severus. Snape's eyes narrowed. You want me near the threshold. I want you near the students, Dumbledore said softly. And I want your senses near the castle's edges. If anything stirs beyond the wards, you will feel it first. Snape's mouth tightened, but he inclined his head slightly. As you wish. The room felt smaller now, like everyone had taken a step closer to something they didn't want to name. Harry looked again at the cabinet. He could swear the carvings shifted when he wasn't looking directly at them, like a living thing pretending to be still. The whisper had stopped, for now, but he could still feel it, faintly, like an echo caught in the stone. Dumbledore moved to the door Harry had come through and opened it. Beyond lay a narrow corridor that Harry recognized only vaguely, one of those half-forgotten arteries of Hogwarts that students rarely used because it led nowhere interesting. Tonight, it felt like it led somewhere important. Come, Dumbledore said gently. Harry followed. They moved swiftly, the professor's footsteps quiet but purposeful. As they walked, Harry noticed something strange. The castle's sounds were muted. No distant laughter, no shouting, no clanging suits of armor, arguing with each other. Just hush. As if Hogwarts had told every painting, every ghost, every brick and stair to keep silent and listen. They descended a staircase Harry didn't remember ever taking. The air grew colder. Blue-green light seeped from sconces that looked older than the rest of the castle. The stones here felt different underfoot, smooth, heavier, as though they had been polished by centuries of careful passing. They reached a landing where the corridor widened into a shallow arch. A faint vibration thrummed through the wall. Not loud, not even clearly felt unless you stood still. But Harry felt it immediately, as if it matched some rhythm inside his chest. Flitwick took out his wand and pressed it lightly to the stone. His face tightened. It's, awake, he whispered. McGonagall's voice was tight. How far? Flitwick shut his eyes, listening. Not fully, but it's pressing, like fingers against glass. Harry swallowed hard. Is it going to open again? Dumbledore looked at the stone with quiet attention. Not if we remind the castle of its own strength, he said. He turned to Harry. Stay just behind me. Harry obeyed, though every part of him wanted to lean closer and press his own ear to the wall. The pull was stronger here, like the castle's hidden bones were humming. Dumbledore raised his wand. The air tightened, as if the corridor itself straightened. Now, Dumbledore murmured. Flitwick and McGonagall raised their wands as well. Their spells were not bright fireworks. They were precise, controlled. Like stitching a seam closed with invisible thread, light flowed, thin and silver, from their wand tips into the stone, spreading outward in delicate lines that sank into the wall, like water soaking into cloth. The vibration eased slightly. Harry felt the pressure behind his eyes lessen. He exhaled, surprised he'd been holding his breath. Then, from somewhere deep inside the stone, the whisper returned. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just close enough to make Harry's skin prickle. And this time it did not feel like pleading. It felt like recognition. Like a door that had just sensed the hand on the other side. Harry's scar prickled sharply. He hissed, hand flying up instinctively. McGonagall snapped her gaze to him. "Harry, I'm okay," he forced out, though his voice shook. It just pricked. Dumbledore's eyes sharpened. "What did you feel?" Harry swallowed. "It's here," he whispered. "It knows we're here." Flitwick's face went even paler. "Albus," Dumbledore did not move, but his voice dropped so low it felt like another kind of ward. "Then we will not leave you alone with it." The stone wall in front of them shivered only once. A subtle ripple, like breath pressed against a window. And in the hush that followed, the whisper threaded through again. Soft, almost gentle, almost patient. A single phrase slid into Harry's mind like a key trying a lock. "Find the hinge." Harry went cold, because the words were clear. And because it felt, unmistakably, like they were meant for him. Dumbledore's hand tightened on Harry's shoulder, just a fraction, steadying him. "We will proceed," Dumbledore said quietly, as if announcing a lesson to a class that had never existed before. "The castle has given us a clue." McGonagall's voice was sharp with alarm. "Albus," Dumbledore looked at her, calm but unwavering. "If the door is searching for its hinge," he said, "then we must find it first." Harry stared at the stone wall, heart pounding, scar prickling faintly like a compass needle pointing towards something hidden. And somewhere behind the stone, somewhere adjacent to Hogwarts, something waited, patient as winter, listening for the next mistake. The whisper had faded, but the words it left behind stayed lodged in Harry's mind like a splinter. Find the hinge. It wasn't just a suggestion. It wasn't even a threat. It was a direction. Harry stood in the cold corridor beneath the great hall, with Dumbledore's hand on his shoulder, the stone wall trembling faintly beneath the professor's wards. The air smelled like old dust and something sharper, ozone almost, as if lightning had passed through the rock and left its taste behind. McGonagall's expression was set in that hard, furious way Harry had seen only a handful of times. When a student had been truly endangered, when someone had broken the rules in a way that could not be shrugged off. When the castle itself had demanded responsibility. Flitwick kept his wand pressed to the stone, eyes half-lidded, as if he could hear something through the wall that the rest of them could not. Snape had appeared without Harry seeing him arrive, as if he'd stepped out of shadow and decided to remain part of it. He stood near the archway behind them, arms folded, gaze fixed on the corridor, with the patient wariness of a predator that didn't trust the ground. Dumbledore lowered his wand slightly, not releasing the magic, just easing the pressure. "It has spoken to you," he said quietly to Harry, as if naming a fact made it less dangerous. Harry swallowed. It said it like it knew I'd understand. Snape's mouth twisted, or like it knew you would be curious enough to try. McGonagall's eyes flashed. Severus. "It is relevant," Snape said smoothly, eyes never leaving Harry. "Curiosity has a habit of opening doors." Dumbledore's voice remained calm. "Curiosity can also close them," he said, and there was a gentle firmness in the way he said it that made Snape's expression tighten. Harry looked back at the wall. It was ordinary stone now. No seam, no pale light, no crack. And yet the corridor felt different, like standing beside a sleeping creature, knowing it could wake with a single wrong movement. Flitwick drew in a breath. Albus, he murmured, voice thin, the pressure is shifting, not increasing, not decreasing. It's, relocation. McGonagall leaned in, her eyes sharp. Relocating where? Flitwick's wand trembled slightly. Along the foundations, he whispered. Like water searching for a path. Harry felt the words drop cold into his stomach. It wasn't forcing the door anymore. It was looking for something else. Dumbledore nodded slowly, eyes thoughtful. Then it is doing what it has always done, he said softly. McGonagall's voice clipped. Which is? Dumbledore's gaze stayed on the stone, searching for the hinge. Harry's throat tightened. What is the hinge? He asked. Like an actual hinge. A place where it can open? Snape's voice was flat. A weakness. Dumbledore's eyes flicked to Snape, then returned to Harry. Not exactly a weakness, he said. More an intended point of movement. A place designed to allow passage, once. Harry stared at him. Once. So someone made it? Flitwick swallowed, and when he spoke his voice carried the faint tremor of someone who hated history for being true. There are very old enchantments woven into Hogwarts, he said. Older than the Founder's most famous spells. Some were not created so much as borrowed. McGonagall's jaw clenched. Phileas. It's already stirring, Flitwick whispered, eyes wide now. We can't pretend it's not there. Dumbledore's hand left Harry's shoulder. He stepped closer to the wall, the hem of his robes brushing the stone. Hogwarts is built on intersections, he said quietly. Ley lines of magic, ancient currents that were here long before we laid the first stone. Harry's mind flashed to Professor Binns, droning on about Britain's old magical sites, half the class asleep. He had never listened properly. Now he wished he had listened to every word. Dumbledore continued, Sometimes, when powerful magic is anchored in a place for centuries, it forms adjacent spaces, rooms that exist because the magic needed somewhere to go, like steam building behind a kettle's lid. Snape's eyes narrowed. And if it finds the hinge, it will not be content with steam. McGonagall's voice was sharp. Enough metaphors. Dumbledore gave a small smile that did not reach his eyes. Very well, he said. If it finds the hinge, it will find a way to open itself into Hogwarts. Harry went cold. Flitwick's wand pulsed brighter as if in response to Harry's fear. The corridor's torches flickered. The air felt like it tightened, drawing in around them, as if the castle itself had begun to hold its breath. McGonagall's voice lowered. We will locate it first. Harry stared at her. How? McGonagall looked at him, and for a moment her severity softened into something almost protective. By doing what Hogwarts has always done, she said, by using its own secrets against it. Snape's lip curled. And by using Potter as a beacon. McGonagall's gaze snapped to him, furious. Do not. Dumbledore's voice cut through like a steady bell. Harry will be present, he said, not as bait, but because the whisper addressed him. That means something. Snape's eyes glittered. It means he is vulnerable. Dumbledore's gaze held Snape's. It means he is connected, which can be used defensively as well as offensively. Snape looked away, but the tension in his shoulders did not ease. Dumbledore turned to Flitwick. "Can you track the pressure?" he asked. Flitwick nodded rapidly. "Yes, if we move slowly. It's like a draft through cracks in the floorboards. If we rush, we'll miss the direction." McGonagall drew herself up. "Then we follow it." And so they began. They moved deeper into the lower levels of Hogwarts, down staircases that felt older than the rest of the castle. The stones here were darker, damp in places, cold enough to seep into Harry's bones. The air smelled faintly of water and iron, as though the castle's foundations had been laid over something that had never truly dried. The corridors grew narrower. The ceilings lowered. Carvings of unfamiliar symbols lined the arches, not the neat runes of a classroom chart, but older marks that looked like they'd been gouged into the stone by hands that didn't fear the castle's response. Harry's scar pricked now and then, not in sharp pain, but in small, irritating pulses, like someone tapping a finger against his forehead from the inside. Every time it happened, Harry felt a faint tug, subtle but definite, toward a particular direction. He hated it, and he couldn't ignore it. They passed a stairwell that Harry knew led toward the dungeons, but they did not take it. Instead, they turned down a passage that looked almost unused, the stones less worn, the corners darker, as if few feet had walked here for a long time. Flitwick paused every few yards, pressing his wand to the wall, closing his eyes, listening. "Here," he murmured at one point. "It's stronger." McGonagall glanced around. "This is near the kitchens." Harry blinked, startled. He could feel it now, too, like a faint vibration in the floor, almost like footsteps far away. But it wasn't footsteps. It was something searching. Snape's voice was low, edged. "It's moving toward places with—" He stopped. McGonagall's eyes narrowed. "With what?" Snape's expression tightened as if he disliked saying the word. "Traffic," he said. "Movement. Habit. The castle's daily rhythms. It wants a hinge where the castle's magic is already bending constantly." Harry thought of the shifting staircases, the moving portraits, the secret tunnels, the walls that sometimes weren't walls if you knew the right pattern of taps. The castle was full of hinges. Dumbledore said softly, "We must not let it find one." They continued. As they walked, the silence of the lower corridors pressed in, broken only by the soft swish of robes and the occasional crackle of a torch. Even the portraits down here seemed subdued, their painted faces watching with uneasy stillness. At last, Flitwick stopped in front of a stretch of stone wall that looked utterly ordinary. He pressed his wand to it and inhaled sharply. "It's here," he whispered. Harry's scar prickled. The tug in his chest tightened. The air changed. Not dramatically, no gust, no thunder, but as if the temperature dropped a single degree, and the corridor suddenly felt a touch too narrow. McGonagall stepped closer, eyes scanning the stone. "There's nothing here." Snape's voice was quiet. "That is the point." Dumbledore moved forward. His fingers brushed the wall gently, not like he was searching for a crack, but like he was greeting a living thing. Harry watched Dumbledore's hand, feeling sick with dread and strange, unwilling fascination. "What is it?" Harry asked, voice tight. Dumbledore's eyes remained on the stone. "A seam," he said softly, "not of stone, of enchantment." Flitwick nodded rapidly. "It's layered. Old spellwork over older spellwork, like a patch over a patch, over a scar." McGonagall's expression hardened. So the hinge is here. Dumbledore did not answer immediately. He seemed to be listening, head tilted slightly, as if the wall was speaking in a language he understood. Then he said quietly, "No." McGonagall blinked. "No?" Dumbledore's voice was soft, but certain. "This is not the hinge," he said. "This is a memory of the hinge." Harry felt his stomach drop. "What does that mean?" Snape's voice was dry. "It means we are already too late." McGonagall snapped. "We are not." Flitwick's wand suddenly flared. The stone wall shivered, and for a heartbeat Harry saw it, not with his eyes, but with something behind them, a thin, pale line running through the stone like a vein. The line pulsed once. Then it moved. Downward. Downward. As if the seam itself had slipped like a snake through rock and was sliding away beneath their feet. Flitwick gasped. "It's going lower." Dumbledore's eyes sharpened. "It has been distracted," he murmured. McGonagall's voice was urgent. "By what?" Harry's scar flared painfully, sharp, sudden, and Harry staggered, hissing, clutching his forehead. The corridor wavered. Not like a vision. Like the castle itself had taken a step. Harry's breath came fast. "It's..." He gasped. "It's calling." Like a door knocking from the inside. Dumbledore's gaze snapped to him. "What did you feel?" Harry forced himself to focus, to find the sensation beneath the pain. It wasn't just pressure. It was... direction. It was a pull, so specific it felt like a finger pointing. Harry swallowed hard and pointed down the corridor toward a narrow stairwell that dipped into darkness. "There," he said hoarsely. "Down there." Snape's eyes narrowed. "Of course." McGonagall looked between Harry and the stairwell, then made a decision. "We go," she said. They descended. The stairwell was steep, the steps worn and uneven. The air grew damp. A faint sound reached them as they went. Not voices, not footsteps, but something like the soft, constant drip of water. Harry's scar throbbed with each step. At the bottom, the corridor opened into a space that felt more like a subterranean passage than part of a school. The walls were rougher, the ceiling lower, the torchlight dimmer, as though the flames themselves did not like being down here. Flitwick pressed his wand to the ground and closed his eyes. His face tightened. "It's close," he whispered. Harry felt the tug in his chest intensify. The air ahead seemed slightly thinner, like the corridor's end wasn't quite anchored. They rounded a corner, and there, set into the stone, was a door. Not a Hogwarts door. Not oak, not iron, not anything familiar. It was black stone, polished to a faint sheen, with no handle and no keyhole. Its surface was carved with symbols that seemed to shift when Harry looked at them directly, like the carvings were trying to become something else, something his mind couldn't hold. The moment Harry saw it, his scar screamed. He stumbled, catching himself against the wall. Vision swimming. McGonagall was already raising her wand, face fierce. Flitwick made a small whimpering sound, half fear, half awe. Snape's eyes narrowed to slits. "There," he murmured. "That is your hinge." Dumbledore stared at the door, and for the first time since this began, Harry saw something like genuine concern flicker across Dumbledore's face. The black stone door pulsed once, very faintly like it had breathed. Then, from nowhere and everywhere, the whisper returned. Not inside Harry's mind this time. In the air, soft as dust. Clear as a bell. At last. Harry's blood turned to ice. McGonagall stepped forward, wand poised. "You will not open," she said, voice like steel. The whisper seemed to smile. The door's carvings shifted again, briefly aligning into a pattern that made Harry's stomach twist with uneasy familiarity, like looking at a map that almost made sense. Then the whisper spoke again, softer, almost coaxing. "He is here." Harry's breath hitched. Snape's gaze snapped to Harry, cold with confirmation. Dumbledore's hand rose, palm outward, not as a ward but as a silent command. "Do not move." Harry forced his feet to stay planted, though every instinct screamed to step back, to run, to put as much stone between himself and that door as possible. McGonagall's voice sharpened. "Dumbledore." Dumbledore did not look away from the door. "It has found what it was searching for," he said softly. Flitwick's voice trembled. "Help us. We have wards. We can." Dumbledore's tone remained gentle but firm. "We can brace it," he said. "We can bind it. We can delay it." His eyes narrowed slightly. "But a hinge, once found, has a habit of being used." The door pulsed again, and for a breath Harry felt something behind it. Not a monster, not a person, but a place pressing close. A cold, vast hall of darkness and pillars. A quiet that wasn't peaceful but patient. And something in that place leaned toward the door, as if it had been waiting to press its ear against it for centuries. Harry's scar burned, his mind filled with a sudden vivid image, not seen but felt. A corridor of stone. A severe woman pressing her hand to an archway. A stern man saying, "You can lock a door, but you cannot stop a place from having a hinge." The memory from the pensieve surged through Harry like a wave. Dumbledore's voice cut through, calm but urgent. "Minerva," he said, "we must seal this, not by force, but by agreement." McGonagall's head snapped toward him. Agreement? With that? Dumbledore's gaze remained fixed on the door. "Not with," he said softly. "With Hogwarts." Flitwick's eyes widened. "A founder's binding." Dumbledore nodded once. "If the castle remembers this door, it can choose to hold it shut." Snape's voice was a low sneer. "And if the castle decides it wants to know what's on the other side?" Dumbledore's eyes flicked to Snape briefly, and the look in them was quiet, sharp warning. "Then," Dumbledore said, "we will be standing here to remind it why it should not." The door trembled faintly. The whisper returned, and this time it sounded almost amused. "Remind the castle?" The black stone surface rippled, as if something beneath it was shifting its weight. Harry's stomach churned. The air thickened, and somewhere above them, deep in the bones of Hogwarts, something creaked, as if the castle itself was shifting in response, like a sleeping giant turning in its bed. Dumbledore raised his wand. "Now," he said softly. McGonagall and Flitwick raised theirs too. Snape hesitated only a heartbeat before lifting his wand, jaw tight. Harry stood frozen at the edge of their circle, scar burning, breath shallow, feeling like the door could see him even without eyes. Dumbledore's voice dropped into that old, steady cadence that sounded like magic before it became spells. "Hogwarts," he said. Not as a word, but as a name spoken with weight. The torches flared. The corridor's stone seemed to hum. And the black door, the hinge, answered, not by opening, not yet, but by releasing a thin seam of pale light at its edges, like the smallest crack of dawn under a locked bedroom door. The whisper slipped through the seam, soft and eager. Come closer. Harry's legs felt like ice, because he realized something terrible. The door wasn't only searching for a hinge in Hogwarts. It was searching for a hinge in him. The seam of pale light at the edge of the black stone door remained thin, no wider than a thread, yet it changed everything in the corridor. It wasn't simply brightness. It was presence, the sort that made the air feel occupied, as if someone invisible had stepped into the room, and you could sense their attention turning, inch by inch, toward your throat. Harry couldn't stop staring at it. He felt Dumbledore's magic rise like a slow tide, steady, careful, the opposite of panic. McGonagall's magic joined it, clean and sharp as iron drawn from a sheath. Flitwick's was bright and intricate, like a lattice of shimmering wire. Snape's came last, colder than the rest, but no less strong, like black glass forming over a wound. Their wands stayed aimed at the door, but none of them cast the kind of spell Harry expected. No shouted incantation. No blasting curse. No jolt of light. Instead, Dumbledore spoke. Not to the door, to the castle. Hogwarts, he said again, voice low, and the single word rolled through the corridor as if the stones themselves remembered being called. The torches flared in answer, their flames stretching taller and steadier, as though they had been pleased to hear their own name. The black door trembled. The seam of light widened a fraction, as if it had inhaled. And in the thickened air, the whisper returned. Soft, delighted, intimate. It hears you. McGonagall's jaw tightened. It hears far too much, she snapped, and her voice struck the corridor like a ruler slapped against a desk. Flitwick's fingers curled around his wand so tightly his knuckles went pale. This isn't just an object, he breathed. It's a boundary, a line drawn between two spells that have been pressing against each other for centuries. Snape's eyes stayed fixed on the seam. Boundaries erode, he said flatly, especially when someone keeps leaning on them. Harry's scar burned again, not a sharp stab this time, but a steady, relentless heat. He could feel the door's attention like a finger pressed to the inside of his skull. Come closer, it had said. And the worst part was that some traitorous part of Harry's mind, some old, familiar thread of connection, knew how. It wasn't curiosity exactly. It was recognition, like hearing your own name called in a crowd. Dumbledore's voice remained calm. We do not answer it, he said. And the way he said it was not only instruction, it was protection. He lifted his wand slightly, and the tip glowed faintly, not with a spell, but with a kind of readiness. Hogwarts, Dumbledore said a third time, and this time he added something else, words that were not a spell Harry knew but sounded like an oath, like a promise made in the old way, when magic was as much about intent as it was about syllables. The corridor responded. Not with light, not with wind, but with a shift. The stones beneath Harry's feet gave a faint, resonant hum, like a distant cello string plucked once and allowed to vibrate. The torches steadied. Even the air changed. Thicker somehow, like the corridor had decided to hold itself together. The black door resisted, pulsing, its seam of light trembling as though it didn't like being ignored. You cannot refuse a hinge, the whisper murmured, and it sounded amused again, like something that had never in its long existence encountered the word no in any meaningful way. McGonagall's eyes flashed. Watch me. She stepped forward, and Harry's heart lurched, because if anyone could stare down a door that belonged to ancient darkness, It was Professor McGonagall. She planted herself in front of it, like a shield. Her wand was angled precisely at the seam, but she didn't cast. Instead, she spoke too, but unlike Dumbledore's gentle invocation, McGonagall's voice was clipped, commanding. The voice she used when she was telling the castle to behave as if it were merely another student who had forgotten to do their homework. "Hogwarts," she said, "you are home to the children within you. You are sanctuary." The corridor seemed to listen. Harry felt it in his chest, a faint tightening, a sense of something enormous turning its attention downward, like a great creature lowering its head. Flitwick swallowed. "Founder's grammar," he whispered, almost reverent. The old binding phrases. She's speaking the castle's first language. Snape's expression was unreadable. "Oh, attempting to," he said quietly. McGonagall's eyes did not flicker. "You will not open this door," she said. And it sounded like the natural conclusion to everything the castle had ever been. For a heartbeat, there was stillness. The seam of light paused. Even Harry's scar eased slightly, as if the pressure had halted. Then the whisper slipped through again, silk smooth. "Home?" The single word carried something like mockery and longing tangled together. The seam of light flared brighter, and for a moment Harry saw, just for a blink, what lay beyond. A vast hall where the ceiling was too high to see. Pillars like bones. An emptiness that felt old enough to have watched mountains rise and sink. And something in that emptiness turned slowly toward the crack. Harry staggered back, breath catching. His hand tightened on his wand without him realizing it. The whisper breathed again, closer this time. So close, it felt like it was spoken directly into his ear. "He belongs." Harry's stomach dropped. McGonagall's voice went sharp. "He does not." Snape's eyes flicked to Harry. "It thinks otherwise." Dumbledore's gaze stayed on the door. "It is tempting," he said softly, not stating. Harry swallowed. It's talking about me," he managed, voice hoarse. Dumbledore's eyes turned to him, and Harry saw that calm again, that strange steadiness Dumbledore carried even when the world tilted. "Yes," Dumbledore said simply, "and that is why you must not answer it. Not with your voice, not with your thoughts, not with your fear." Harry tried, but the door was like a magnet, and his mind was iron. The seam of light widened another fraction, and the carvings on the door shifted again, resolving into something almost like letters, though they weren't letters Harry could read. Flitwick let out a small, terrified sound. "It's writing," he whispered. It's using the castle's own enchantments as parchment." McGonagall's face went pale with fury. "How dare it?" Snape's voice was quiet. "It dares, because it can." The door pulsed, and suddenly, without warning, Harry felt the tug in his chest snap into a tight, painful pull, like a hook sunk into his ribs. His scar flared and his vision blurred. In his mind, a corridor appeared, one he had never seen, yet somehow recognized. Stone walls, damp and narrow, leading to a door that wasn't this door but felt like its twin. A voice, cold, familiar, pleased, whispered, "Open it." Harry sucked in a breath, and the hook yanked. His feet moved. Just one step. But it was one step too many. McGonagall's hand shot out and seized his sleeve, jerking him back with surprising strength. "Harry!" she snapped. Harry blinked, gasping, like he'd surfaced from deep water. The seam of light flared, bright, eager, triumphant. Yes, the whisper purred. Snape's wand flicked up. Legilimens, he hissed, and Harry barely had time to register the word before he felt Snape's mind press against his like a cold blade. Harry's thoughts scattered, instinctively resisting. Snape's eyes narrowed. It's pulling him, he said sharply, voice edged with something between anger and alarm. The connection is active. McGonagall's grip on Harry tightened. Albus. Dumbledore's expression had gone very still. Harry, Dumbledore said gently, look at me. Harry forced his gaze away from the seam and up to Dumbledore's face. Do you trust me? Dumbledore asked quietly. Harry's throat tightened. Yes. Then do what I say precisely, Dumbledore replied. When it speaks, do not think of the door. Think of something else, something solid. Harry swallowed. Like what? Dumbledore's voice softened. The burrow, he said. Or the Gryffindor common room. Or... The sound of Hagrid's laugh. Choose something that is yours and anchor yourself to it. Harry tried to picture the common room fire, bright, crackling, warm. He tried to smell butterbeer and toasted bread. He tried to hear the murmur of voices and the creak of armchairs. His scar still burned, but the hook in his chest loosened slightly. The whisper slid through the seam again, irritated now, as if the door disliked being denied. He is the key. Harry clenched his jaw and pictured Hagrid's enormous hands holding a teacup far too small, his beard moving as he spoke, his voice warm and thick with affection. The pressure in Harry's ribs eased another fraction. Flitwick exhaled shakily. It's testing, he whispered. Testing language. Testing leverage. It's trying to find which words make him move. Snape's voice was low. Then stop letting it speak. McGonagall snapped. How? Snape's eyes flicked to Dumbledore. Silence wards, he said. If we can dampen sound. Dumbledore shook his head slowly. It is not speaking through air alone, he said. It is speaking through enchantment, through the castle's memory, through Harry. Snape's mouth tightened. McGonagall's eyes were fierce. Then, we do not silence it, she said. We outvote it. Flitwick blinked. Outvote? McGonagall's gaze swept the corridor as if addressing more than the three men and the boy beside her. Hogwarts is not one spell, she said. It is thousands layered over centuries. It is the will of the founders, the teachers, the students. The very stones hold promises. She lifted her wand high and spoke again, voice ringing. Hogwarts, she said. Remember who you are. The corridor answered. The torches flared. The stones hummed. A faint draught rose from the floor, cool and clean, like air from a deep lake. Harry felt it, not on his skin but in his bones, a sense of something enormous, stirring awake not the door but the castle itself. The seam of light flickered, uncertain now, like the door had encountered resistance it had not expected. Dumbledore's wand tip glowed brighter. Now, he murmured. He spoke words Harry didn't know, ancient and careful, and as he did, the corridor's stone seemed to brighten faintly, lines of pale gold appearing like veins of sunlight in rock. Flitwick joined in, voice trembling but precise, his spells weaving into Dumbledore's like threads in a tapestry. McGonagall's magic anchored it, stern and unyielding. Snape, after a brief hesitation, added his own, and Harry felt the difference immediately. Snape's magic was colder, but it sealed things, like frost locking water into ice. The pale gold lines spread along the corridor walls, crawling toward the black door. The door trembled, and the seam of light wavered, narrowing, widening, narrowing again, like it couldn't decide whether to fight or flee. The whisper grew sharper, less amused. "You cannot—" McGonagall cut it off with her voice like a whip. "Hogwarts," she said. "Deny it." The corridor pulsed. The pale gold lines reached the black door. For the first time, the door reacted like something alive in pain. It shuddered violently. The seam of light flared, too bright, too sudden, and Harry cried out, clutching his forehead as his scar flamed. The whisper screamed, not loud, but wide, like a sound echoing through an endless space. "Hing!" The word struck Harry like a blow. His mind flooded with images. A door opening inward. A corridor that shouldn't exist. A shadow moving through stone. Students laughing in the great hall, unaware. The castle's corridors bending. Something stepping through. Harry's knees buckled. But Dumbledore's voice cut through the storm, steady as a hand on a shoulder. "Harry," he said firmly, "anchor." Harry clung to the image of the common room fire like it was a rope. He pictured the red and gold hangings, the warmth, the safety. He pictured Ron's laugh, Hermione's voice scolding, the soft thump of someone dropping into a chair. Slowly, painfully, the flood receded. And, as it did, Harry realized something chilling. The door wasn't just trying to open into Hogwarts. It was trying to open into him. Because whatever lay beyond didn't simply want entrance. It wanted host. The pale gold lines brightened, and the corridor's hum deepened into something like a heartbeat. The seam of light shrank. Millimeter by millimeter, it narrowed. The whisper hissed, furious. "You think you can choose?" Dumbledore's eyes were bright, unwavering. "Yes," he said softly. "That is what a home does." The seam narrowed again, and then, suddenly, Harry felt the tug in his chest snap, like a thread cut clean. His scar cooled, leaving only a dull ache. The black door stilled. The seam of pale light vanished. The carvings froze, no longer shifting. Silence fell so abruptly, it felt like someone had thrown a blanket over the corridor. Flitwick sagged, panting. McGonagall lowered her wand slowly, but her eyes stayed locked on the door with the intensity of a hawk watching a snake. Snape's wand remained raised a second longer before he lowered it, expression hard. Dumbledore exhaled softly. For a long moment, none of them moved. Then Snape spoke, voice low. "You have not destroyed it." Dumbledore's gaze stayed on the door. "No," he said. McGonagall's voice was tight. "Then what have we done?" Dumbledore's answer was quiet. "We have reminded Hogwarts that it may choose to keep it shut," he said. "For now." Flitwick swallowed, eyes wide. "For now?" he echoed faintly. Harry stared at the black door, feeling hollow with relief and fear. "Will it try again?" he asked. Snape's laugh was humorless. "Of course it will." Dumbledore's eyes flicked to Harry. "But it has learned something," he said softly. Harry's stomach tightened. "What?" Dumbledore's voice was grave. "That you are the easiest hinge it can find." Harry's breath hitched. McGonagall's hand tightened around his sleeve again, as if she could physically hold him inside the world if she tried hard enough. "And that," Dumbledore continued, means we must do something Hogwarts has not had to do in a very long time. Snape's eyes narrowed. Which is? Dumbledore turned his gaze toward the corridor leading back up, toward the life and noise of the school above them. We must teach the castle to lock a door it has forgotten exists, he said quietly, and somewhere deep in the stone, Harry felt it. A faint, distant shifting, as if the castle itself had heard and was uneasy about the task, because Hogwarts did not like to be told what to do, even by those who loved it. They did not leave the corridor immediately, not because anyone wanted to stay, because leaving felt like turning your back on something that had just learned your name. The black door sat in its frame as if it had always been there. As if it had always been there, as if it hadn't tried to pull Harry apart from the inside of his own ribs only moments ago. The carvings lay still now, no longer sliding into new shapes. But the stone around the door looked subtly wrong. Not cracked, not scorched, just tired, as if the hallway had been forced to hold its breath for too long. The torches burned steady again, yet Harry couldn't stop looking for flickers in them. He couldn't stop listening for the return of that whisper. McGonagall did not release his sleeve. Her fingers remained tight at his elbow, the grip of someone who had spent a lifetime keeping children from toppling off staircases, out of windows, through doors that should not exist. Flitwick sat down on the floor, not in collapse, exactly. More like a man who had decided that if his legs were going to shake, he would at least choose the position in which they did it. Fascinating, he said faintly, then shook his head as though scolding himself for the word. No, not fascinating. Unacceptable. Utterly. Save your adjectives, Snape cut in. His voice was quiet, but it carried. In the tight corridor, even a whisper could feel like a slap. Flitwick pressed his lips together and nodded once, eyes still fixed on the door. Dumbledore lowered his wand fully, but he didn't put it away. He looked at the black door, the way someone looked at a sleeping dragon. Not with fear, exactly, but with the clear knowledge that sleep was not the same as harmless. Harry tried to swallow and realized his mouth was dry. It's gone, he said, not quite trusting his own words. It is quiet, Dumbledore corrected gently. McGonagall's nostrils flared. Albus, Dumbledore turned his head. Minerva. Her gaze was sharp enough to cut stone. We are not leaving this corridor unguarded. Snape's mouth curved in something that might have been agreement, if agreement on Severus Snape's face didn't always look like displeasure. You have finally said something I do not wish to argue with. McGonagall ignored him with the ease of long practice. We need wards. Physical wards. Magical wards. A rotation of staff. This door, this thing, is not to be approached by students, staff, ghosts, or house elves. Flitwick lifted a hand slightly. The elves, he whispered, alarm flickering over his face. They move through the castle so freely. I will speak to them, Dumbledore said, and to the portraits, and to the ghosts. Snape's eyes narrowed. And what will you tell them? Please avoid the ancient hungry door beneath the castle. Dumbledore's expression did not change, but something in his eyes sharpened. I will tell them the truth that keeps them alive. Harry's scar gave a faint throb, as if to agree that the castle itself was listening. McGonagall finally loosened her grip on Harry's sleeve, though she stayed close enough that her robe brushed his shoulder. We should move, she said, brisk now, forcing normality onto the moment like a blanket. We cannot stand here indefinitely. Harry nodded too quickly, because if he stood still any longer, he was afraid his mind would drift back toward the seam of light that had shown him a place with bone pillars and a ceiling that didn't end. Dumbledore made a small motion with his wand. The pale gold lines that had spread along the corridor walls dimmed but did not disappear entirely. They sank into the stone like warmth absorbed after a fire. Then he turned, and as he did, the corridor behind them seemed reluctant. Harry felt it like a faint pressure against his back, as though the hallway wanted them to look one last time. He didn't. He fixed his gaze on McGonagall's shoulder and followed. They moved as a unit back through the twisting passageways, Dumbledore in front, McGonagall at Harry's side, Snape behind, Flitwick shuffling along in the middle with the careful gait of a man holding too many thoughts at once. The castle above them did what it always did. It pretended nothing had happened. That was the worst part. As they climbed, the air grew warmer. The familiar smell of old stone and wax and distant dinner floated down the stairs. Somewhere far away, a group of students laughed. The sound echoed down the corridor like it belonged to a different world. When they emerged through a concealed panel into a quiet hallway near the Charms corridor, the normal Hogwarts bustle brushed against them like a tide. A suit of armor snored softly at its post. A painting of a witch darning socks glanced up, blinked at Dumbledore, and immediately pretended it hadn't seen a thing. 2 second years hurried past with armfuls of parchment and did not notice the 5 adults standing there as if they'd just stepped out of a storm. Harry felt a dizzy mismatch between the above and the below. Below, bone pillars in a hall that wasn't truly a hall. Above, a boy complaining about homework. The castle held both realities at once, as easily as it held staircases that moved. McGonagall's voice cut through it, crisp and decisive. "Headmaster, I want auras." Snape's lip curled. The Ministry, yes. Let's invite Fudge and his gaggle of incompetents to poke at an ancient enchantment with their boots. It isn't Fudge anymore, Flitwick blurted without meaning to, then flushed. I mean, of course, Minerva's point. Some official support. Snape's eyes flicked at him like a blade. The Ministry's name changes. Its stupidity remains. Dumbledore raised a hand slightly, not to silence them, but to steady the moment. Not yet, he said. Not until we understand what we are dealing with. Ministry involvement is a last step, not a first. McGonagall's jaw tightened. Albus, we cannot keep this within the school if children are in danger. Dumbledore's gaze softened. They are in danger regardless, he said quietly. We are simply choosing whether the danger is managed or broadcast. That shut the argument down, because Harry could hear the truth in it. McGonagall inhaled sharply, then nodded once. Fine, but we do something immediately. We will, Dumbledore said. He turned to Harry then, and Harry felt the shift, the moment the conversation stopped being about stone and wards and started being about him. Harry, Dumbledore said gently, I will ask you to do something difficult. Harry's stomach sank. What? Dumbledore's voice remained calm. I will ask you to return to your dormitory, to go about your evening as normally as you can. Harry stared. Normally? McGonagall snapped. Absolutely not. Snape's eyes narrowed. He's bait. Harry flinched. Dumbledore's gaze did not leave Harry's face. No, Dumbledore said softly, and there was steel under the softness now. He is a student, and if we treat him like bait, we become the kind of people we have spent our lives opposing. Snape's mouth tightened, but he said nothing. McGonagall looked as if she wanted to argue until the stones cracked, but Dumbledore turned to her gently. Minerva, I will increase patrols. I will personally escort him part of the way. Severus! No, Snape said immediately. Dumbledore's eyebrows rose. Snape's jaw worked once. No, he repeated, as if the word tasted bitter. I will not escort him. I will monitor him. McGonagall's eyes flashed. Severus. Dumbledore inclined his head slightly, accepting the compromise. Monitor, then, he said. Harry swallowed. So, just go back, like I didn't just nearly get pulled into a door beneath the castle? Dumbledore's eyes were kind, and that kindness made Harry's throat tighten. Yes, he said quietly, because the castle is full of children who must sleep tonight without fear. If you walk through the corridors with terror on your face, it will spread faster than any whisper. Harry hated that he understood. He hated more that he could already feel the door's whisper sitting behind his thoughts, like a shadow waiting for his attention to slip. McGonagall stepped closer, voice softer now, though her posture remained fierce. Harry, I'll have the prefects keep the corridors calm. I'll speak to your head of house. Ah, I'm fine, Harry lied. McGonagall's eyes made it clear she did not believe him for a second. Dumbledore made a small gesture. We will speak again tonight, he said. Not in public. In my office, after curfew. Harry nodded. Snape's gaze stayed on Harry's forehead, like he could see the scar through skin and bone. Flitwick looked as though he wanted to apologize for the universe. Dumbledore turned them down a corridor and began walking with a pace that signaled the conversation was not finished, only relocated. They moved through the castle in a tight, watchful cluster. Harry tried not to look suspicious. He tried to keep his breathing even. But Hogwarts was too sensitive a place to ignore tension entirely. A portrait of a snoring wizard cracked one eye open as they passed, then promptly pretended to sleep harder. Peeves floated by upside down with a stack of chalk, took one look at McGonagall's face and vanished as if he'd suddenly remembered an urgent appointment elsewhere. Even nearly headless Nick drifted out of a side corridor, saw Dumbledore, and slowed. Headmaster, he said politely, spectral voice as smooth as always. Dumbledore paused just long enough. Nicholas, he replied. Nick's gaze slid briefly to Harry, and for a moment Harry saw something like concern on the ghost's translucent face. Is everything, Nick began. Not now, McGonagall said very softly, and the softness somehow made it more final. Nick bowed his head slightly. Of course, he said, and drifted away, his ruff fluttering. Harry had the sudden, unsettling thought that if even the ghosts were being subtly redirected, the castle was already being taught a new rule. Avoid that place. The staff separated near the marble staircase. McGonagall peeled off toward the Great Hall, with the brisk stride of a woman about to reorganize an entire school overnight. Flitwick headed toward the Charms classroom, muttering to himself in a rapid stream of theory and alarm. Snape vanished into the shadow of a corridor, like he belonged to it. Dumbledore remained with Harry. They walked slowly, and for a while Dumbledore said nothing. The silence felt deliberate, giving Harry room to settle, to breathe, to remember that he was still above ground. At the entrance to the Gryffindor corridor, Dumbledore finally spoke. Harry, he said, you did well. Harry almost laughed, but it came out shaky. I nearly walked into it. You stopped, Dumbledore corrected, and you anchored. Harry's hand drifted unconsciously to his scar. It was cool now, still tender, but not screaming. You things, Harry said, voice low. Dumbledore's eyes sharpened. What did it say? Harry hesitated. Telling Dumbledore felt like making the words real. But Dumbledore had stood in the corridor and spoken to Hogwarts like a friend and a fortress. If anyone could hear it and not flinch, it was him. It said, "I belong." Harry swallowed. And it called me the hinge, the key. Dumbledore's face did not change, but Harry saw something darken in his eyes, a flicker of recognition. "Did it show you anything?" Dumbledore asked. Harry's stomach tightened again. "A place," he admitted. "Like a hall. Huge. Pillars like bones. Something turning toward the crack." Dumbledore nodded slowly. "And did you feel it was outside Hogwarts?" Harry stared. "Yes." Dumbledore's voice went very quiet. "Then it is not merely a forgotten room," he said. "It is a boundary, a seam between spells." Harry felt cold creep into his limbs. Dumbledore's hand lifted, not touching Harry, but hovering near his shoulder, a gesture of reassurance that did not invade. "You have been connected to dark magic before," Dumbledore said gently. "It has tried to use you as a doorway. Tonight, it tried again." Harry's throat tightened. "Is it Voldemort?" Dumbledore did not answer immediately, and that pause was its own kind of terror. "I do not believe it is him," Dumbledore said at last. "Not directly, but I believe it is something old enough to have learned the shape of that kind of power. Something that recognizes a scar like yours as opportunity." Harry's hands clenched into fists. "So it's worse." Dumbledore's gaze was steady. "Not worse," he said carefully. "Different, and unknowns feel worse because we cannot name them." Harry hated that he had no argument. They reached the fat lady's portrait. She blinked at them, took in Dumbledore's calm and Harry's pale face, and her mouth pursed. "Well," she said, "you are out late." Dumbledore smiled politely. "An unusual evening," he said. The fat lady sniffed. "You can say that again." "There's a draft in the corridor, and my frame keeps rattling. I don't like it." Harry's stomach dipped. Dumbledore's eyes flicked to the portrait, gentle but attentive. "Thank you for telling me," he said softly. "If you feel it again, please inform Professor McGonagall at once." The fat lady looked briefly flustered at being taken seriously. "Of course." Then she glanced at Harry, softened a fraction. "Password? Fortuna Major," Harry said automatically, though he had no idea if that was right. The fat lady sighed theatrically. "Thank goodness. At least someone remembers." And she swung open. Warmth spilled out of the common room like a hug. The fire crackled. The air smelled of wool and parchment and something sweet, treacle tart maybe, lingering from dinner. Students sat in clusters, some studying, some playing exploding snap, some simply talking. A few glanced up at Harry as he entered, but no one leapt to attention. No one screamed that something was wrong with the sky or the castle or the boy who lived. "Normality held." Harry's chest loosened slightly, painfully, as though he hadn't realized how tightly he'd been holding himself together. Dumbledore paused at the threshold, his gaze sweeping the room with a protective affection that almost hurt to see. "Go," he said softly to Harry. Harry nodded and stepped inside. As Dumbledore turned to leave, Harry blurted, "Headmaster." Dumbledore looked back. Harry's voice came out small. "What if it talks again?" Dumbledore's eyes were very calm. "Then you do what you did before," he said. "You do not answer. You anchor. And you remember, even if a voice knows your name, it does not own you." Ah. Harry's throat burned. He nodded. Dumbledore gave him one last look. Quiet, reassuring, and then the portrait swung closed, cutting off the corridor and leaving Harry in warmth. For a moment he simply stood there, feeling too tall and too old and too young all at once. Hermione was at a table near the fire with a book open, her quill moving rapidly. Ron sat beside her, leaning back in his chair, looking bored in the way only Ron could look while Hermione did actual work. Ron spotted Harry first and grinned. There he is. Where have you been? Thought you'd fallen into a staircase or got eaten by a suit of armor. Hermione's head snapped up. Ron, Harry forced a smile. Just got held up, he said. Hermione's eyes narrowed the way they always did when Harry lied. Held up by what? Harry hesitated for half a second too long. Ron's grin faded slightly. Mate. Harry tried to find the simplest safe shape of truth. Teachers, he said. Dumbledore wanted to talk. Hermione stood, chair scraping. Now, this late? Harry shrugged, pushing casualness onto his shoulders like a robe that didn't fit. Yeah. Hermione stepped closer, lowering her voice. Harry, your face. I'm fine, Harry said again, and it sounded even less convincing the second time. Ron leaned forward. Is it Voldemort stuff? Harry flinched involuntarily at the name. Hermione noticed. Her eyes sharpened. Harry's mouth went dry. He could almost hear Dumbledore's warning. If you spread fear, it spreads faster than any whisper. So Harry did what he had learned to do too young. He tucked the truth away. No, he said. Not that, just school stuff. Hermione didn't believe him. Ron didn't either, but they both recognized the tone of not here. Hermione's voice softened, but her eyes stayed intent. Okay, she said, but you're telling us later. Harry nodded quickly. Later. Ron stood up. Right, well, come sit. Hermione's trying to make me read something dreadful about goblin treaties. Hermione scowled. It's not dreadful, it's important. Harry let them pull him into the warmth of their argument like a lifeline. He sat by the fire, hands extended toward the heat, and tried to let the crackling and murmuring wash the corridor below out of his ears. It almost worked. Almost. Because even as Hermione lectured and Ron complained, Harry felt it subtle, like a hair lifting on the back of his neck, not a voice. A sense that somewhere, far beneath the castle, something waited with patient hunger. Harry stared at the flames and tried to anchor. He thought of Hagrid's laugh. He thought of the burrow's cluttered warmth. He thought of the Gryffindor common room on Christmas morning. He built the images carefully, brick by brick, like he was constructing a wall inside his own mind. Hermione was saying something about clauses, and Ron was making dramatic gagging noises. Harry smiled faintly at them, and for a few minutes he could almost pretend he was just a student again. Curfew came like it always did, gradually, students drifting away in twos and threes, yawning, stretching, arguing about who had to blow out which candle. The fire burned lower. The common room quieted. Hermione packed her books with the relentless efficiency of someone who could not rest while knowledge existed unsorted. Ron complained about being tired, then immediately perked up when he found a chocolate frog in his pocket and forgot he'd ever complained at all. Harry laughed at that, and the sound startled him with how normal it was. They climbed the stairs to the boys' dormitory. The room was dim and familiar. The beds hung with red curtains. Samius was already half asleep, Dean muttering something about a Quidditch match. Neville had a book open, but his head kept bobbing, eyelids heavy. Harry changed into pajamas and climbed into bed. He drew the curtains. He lay in the dark, listening to the castle settle. Hogwarts at night had a sound, a faint shifting, a distant groan of pipes, the soft whisper of wind against ancient windows. Normally, it was comforting. Tonight, it felt like a giant creature breathing around him. Harry closed his eyes and tried to sleep. For a while, he floated in the space between waking and dreaming, where thoughts became soft and loose. Then his scar pulsed once, gentle but unmistakable. Harry's eyes snapped open in the dark. He held his breath. No voice came. The scar pulsed. Again. Harry stared at the inside of his bed curtains. The red fabric looked almost black in the darkness. He tried to anchor Hagrid's laugh, the common room fire, Ron's stupid joke, Hermione's fierce voice. The pulsing eased. Harry exhaled slowly. A third pulse came, fainter, and then nothing. Harry lay rigid, waiting for the whisper to follow. It didn't. Minutes passed. His heartbeat slowed. His thoughts began to drift again. He almost slept. Then a soft knock came at the dormitory door. Not loud, not urgent. Just precise. Harry froze. Neville mumbled, "What's that?" then rolled over, still asleep. The door opened quietly. A shadow fell across the floorboards. Harry's hand slid under his pillow, fingers closing around his wand. A voice spoke softly, and Harry recognized it immediately. "Mr. Potter, Snape." Harry sat up slowly, peering through the gap in his curtains. Snape stood in the doorway, his robes a darker shadow against the dark. His expression was unreadable. "Get dressed," Snape said, quietly. "The headmaster is waiting." Harry's stomach tightened. Snape's gaze flicked to Harry's forehead. "And do not pretend you've been sleeping," he added, voice like a knife. "The castle can tell when you lie awake." Harry's blood went cold. "What?" Snape's mouth curled slightly. "Get dressed!" Then Snape turned and left, the door closing with a soft click behind him. Harry sat for a moment in the dark, heart hammering. The castle can tell when you lie awake. Was Snape exaggerating? Or was it a warning? Harry swung his legs out of bed, moving carefully, silently. He pulled on his robes and shoes and slipped out of the dormitory like a ghost. The corridor outside was empty. Snape waited near the staircase, arms folded, impatient. Harry followed him down through the sleeping castle. They didn't take the main stairs. Snape led him through side passages, shortcuts, corridors that smelled of dust and cold stone. The portraits were asleep, eyes closed, faces slack. A suit of armor shifted as they passed, metal whispering. Harry clutched his wand inside his sleeve, knuckles white. Snape stopped once, suddenly, and held up a hand. Harry halted. Snape's head tilted slightly, listening. Harry heard nothing. Then, faintly, the torches along the corridor flickered in sequence, one after another, like a slow wave. Snape's eyes narrowed, and for the briefest moment Harry saw something like unease. "Move," Snape hissed. They hurried on. At last they reached the gargoyle that guarded Dumbledore's office. It sat motionless, stone face smug, even in the dark. Snap spoke the password. The gargoyle leapt aside. and the spiral staircase began to move, carrying them upward. Harry's stomach churned as the stairs rose. When they reached the door, Snape pushed it open, without knocking. Warm light spilled out. Dumbledore's office looked the way it always did, warm, crowded, full of peculiar objects that hummed and ticked and glowed. The portraits of old headmasters dozed in their frames, some snoring softly. Fawkes sat on his perch, feathers faintly gleaming, eyes half-lidded as if he too had been resting. Dumbledore stood near his desk, wand in hand. McGonagall was there as well, hair more mussed than usual, but eyes bright and fierce. Flitwick sat on a chair with his feet dangling, looking as if he had not stopped thinking since they left the corridor. Snape pushed Harry forward and shut the door behind them. Dumbledore looked at Harry with gentle intensity. "Thank you for coming so quickly," he said. Harry swallowed. "I didn't have much choice." Snape's mouth twitched. McGonagall said sharply, "Harry, are you all right?" Harry hesitated, then decided lying was pointless in a room full of people who could probably taste fear in the air. "My scar pulsed," he admitted, "but it didn't talk." Flitwick's eyes widened. "It's testing the connection," he whispered. Snape's voice was low, or strengthening it. McGonagall's face tightened. "Albus." Dumbledore's expression remained calm, but Harry could sense the urgency behind it now, the way calm sometimes became when someone used it like a shield. "We have found something," Dumbledore said. "Something that changes the shape of what we must do." Harry's stomach sank. "What?" Dumbledore stepped to his desk and lifted a small object, an old, tarnished key. It was not like the keys in Hogwarts that unlocked broom cupboards or storage closets. This key looked older. The metal was dull, scratched. The teeth were uneven in a way that made Harry's eyes ache slightly, like trying to look at something that wasn't meant to be looked at directly. McGonagall's voice was tight. "We didn't find it," she said. "It was delivered." Harry stared. Delivered by who? Dumbledore's gaze flicked towards the window. The night outside was dark and still. Then Dumbledore looked back at Harry, and his voice dropped. "By Hogwarts," he said. Harry's skin prickled. "That's not funny." Dumbledore didn't smile. "It is not a joke," he said gently. A suit of armor in the entrance hall dropped it at Minerva's feet. It fell out of its breastplate, as if it had been waiting there for centuries. Flitwick leaned forward. "And it wasn't there yesterday," he whispered. "I walked past that armor at least 6 times yesterday." Snape's eyes narrowed. "Which means the castle moved it." Harry's chest tightened. "Why would the castle give you a key?" McGonagall's voice was hard. "Because it knows there's a lock." Dumbledore placed the key carefully on the desk as if it might bite. "We asked the castle to remember who it is," Dumbledore said softly. "And I believe the castle has remembered something else as well." Flitwick's hands trembled slightly. "A fail-safe," he breathed. "A founder's measure. A way to bind a boundary," Dumbledore finished. Harry stared at the key. The teeth seemed to shimmer faintly, not with light but with meaning, like an idea made metal. "And what does this have to do with me?" Harry asked, though he already felt the answer like a stone in his stomach. Snape's voice was cold. "Everything." "Think!" McGonagall snapped. "Severus." Snape shrugged, expression unchanged. He asked. Dumbledore's eyes met Harry's. "Harry," he said gently, "the door below recognized you. It pulled at you. That is not coincidence. I believe your scar, your connection to dark magic, makes you visible To it. Harry's fingers curled around the edge of his sleeve. So, I'm still the hinge. Dumbledore didn't deny it. Yes, he said. But being a hinge does not mean you must swing. Harry's mouth went dry. Then what do you want me to do? Dumbledore hesitated, and the hesitation told Harry this was the part none of them wanted to say out loud. We need to teach the castle to lock what it has forgotten, Dumbledore said softly. And Hogwarts has offered a key. Flitwick whispered, awed. The castle is helping. McGonagall's voice was sharp. Or it's panicking. Snape's eyes flicked to the key. Or it's bargaining. Harry stared between them, feeling like he was standing in the middle of a web tightening. Dumbledore reached into a drawer and pulled out something else, a small stone plaque, no bigger than a book, etched with faint lines. He set it beside the key. These markings, Dumbledore said, match the carvings on the door. Harry leaned closer despite himself. His scar gave a faint, warning pulse. Snape barked, "Don't." Harry stopped. Dumbledore nodded slightly at Snape, acknowledging the caution. Then he looked at Harry again. We must determine whether this key is meant to lock the door, Dumbledore said, or to open it. Silence. Even the ticking devices on the shelves seemed to hush. Harry felt cold spread through his chest. You don't know? McGonagall's voice was fierce. We will not open it. Snape's gaze was flat. We may not get a choice. If it opens on its own, the only difference will be whether we understand it first. Flitwick swallowed hard. If it opens on its own, he trailed off, unable to finish. Harry's mind flashed again with pillars like bones, and an endless ceiling, and something turning toward the crack. He forced the image away, anchoring to warmth. The common room fire, Ron's laugh, Hermione's scolding. Dumbledore watched Harry carefully. Harry, he said, I need to ask you something very specific. Harry's throat tightened. Okay. Dumbledore's voice was quiet. When you were near the door, did you feel, at any point, that you understood it? Harry stared at him. It was a horrifying question, because the answer was not a simple no. Harry remembered that tug of recognition, that magnetic pull, that sense that he could have moved one step and known exactly what to do next. He swallowed. Yes, he admitted, voice hoarse, like it was speaking a language my scar already knew. Snape's eyes narrowed sharply. There it is. McGonagall's face went pale with anger. Severus. Dumbledore held up a hand gently. Thank you, Harry, he said, and his voice held no judgment, only concern. Harry's hands trembled. So what happens now? Dumbledore turned slightly, and for the first time Harry noticed a shallow silver basin sitting on a side table. A pensieve. Its surface swirled faintly, like moonlight stirred into water. Harry's stomach dipped. You want me to... I want to show you something, Dumbledore said. Something that may help you resist the door's voice if it returns. Flitwick's eyes widened. Albus, are you certain? He whispered. Memories are soft places when something is already trying to reach him. Snape's voice was low and sharp. He is already compromised. Harry flinched. McGonagall rounded on Snape. That is enough. Snape's eyes flashed. Is it? Because we can either call things what they are, or keep comforting ourselves while a door beneath the castle tries to wear a boy like a cloak. Harry's anger flared, hot and sudden. I'm right here. Snape's gaze slid to him, cold as winter. Yes, he said. That is the problem. Dumbledore's voice cut through the tension, gentle but absolute. Severus, he said quietly. Snape's jaw tightened. He looked away. Dumbledore turned back to Harry. The memory I wish to show you is not mine, he said. It is Hogwarts. Harry's breath caught. Hogwarts has a memory, Flitwick whispered, almost reverent. Of course it does. It's a castle soaked in magic and history. The stones themselves remember. McGonagall's voice was tight. Albus, be careful. Dumbledore nodded once. Always. He lifted the stone plaque and touched it lightly to the pensive surface. Silver ripples shivered outward. The swirling inside the basin brightened, then darkened, then brightened again, as if something was waking. Harry's scar pulsed, once sharply. Dumbledore's eyes flicked to it. Anchor, he murmured. Harry inhaled slowly and pictured the fire in the common room. The scar eased slightly. Dumbledore looked at Harry. You may choose not to do this, he said softly. I will not force you. Harry stared at the pensieve. Part of him wanted to run back to the dormitory and hide under the blankets like a child. Another part of him knew that running wouldn't change the fact that the door existed, and it knew his name. Harry swallowed. Show me. McGonagall's mouth tightened, but she didn't argue. Snape's expression remained dark. Flitwick looked both terrified and thrilled, like a man watching someone step onto a bridge made of light. Dumbledore gestured to the basin. Then place your hand in the memory, he said, and let it take you. Harry hesitated for only a heartbeat, then leaned forward and dipped his fingers into the cool silver surface. The whirl tilted, the office vanished, and Harry fell. He landed on stone. Not the cold stone of Hogwarts corridors, but something older, rougher, rawer. He looked up. The great hall was there, yet not as he knew it. The ceiling was not enchanted. It was simply high, dark timber. The torches were fewer, their flames smoky and uneven. The long tables were present, but the hall felt emptier, sharper around the edges, as if it hadn't yet been softened by centuries of laughter and food and floating candles. Students sat stiffly, dressed in robes that looked heavier and older. Their faces were pale in the torchlight, their eyes wide and watchful. At the staff table sat 4 figures. Harry's breath caught. He knew them not because he had seen them, but because their names were written into the castle like bones into a body. Godric Gryffindor sat with his hands folded, broad-shouldered, hair tied back, eyes warm but alert. Rowena Ravenclaw sat upright, with an expression like a blade wrapped in silk, her gaze sharp, her fingers stained with ink. Helga Hufflepuff sat with a gentleness that seemed to radiate outward, her hands steady, her eyes kind but tired. And Salazar Slytherin sat slightly apart, his face pale in the torchlight, his expression unreadable. Harry's heart hammered. He was looking at the founders. Or rather, Hogwarts was letting him look through its own remembered eyes. The air of the hall was tense, thick with an argument that had already been going for too long. Gryffindor spoke, his voice carrying like a clear bell. You cannot carve fear into stone and call it protection, Salazar. Slytherin's eyes flashed. And you cannot leave the doors unbarred and call it kindness. Ravenclaw's tone was precise. We are not discussing kindness. We are discussing structure. The castle's enchantments are stable only if the foundations are balanced. Hufflepuff's voice was gentle, but it carried weight. The children feel it, she said softly. They feel the tension in the stones. They should not have to. Harry stood frozen, heart pounding, watching. Slytherin lifted a hand, and the torchlight glinted off a ring on his finger. They should feel it, he said coldly. They should understand that this world is not safe. Gryffindor's jaw tightened. They are children. Slytherin's gaze was sharp. Then teach them to survive. Ravenclaw's eyes narrowed. Survival is not the only goal of education. Slytherin's mouth curved slightly, spoken like someone who has never been hunted. Hufflepuff flinched faintly at the word. Gryffindor's hand moved toward his sword, not drawing it, but touching the hilt as if the gesture soothed him. This ends, he said quietly. Slytherin's eyes were bright with something dangerous. It ends when the castle is safe, he said. And it will not be safe until the rot is cut out. The hall went colder. Harry felt it even in the memory, a chill that crept along stone. Hufflepuff's voice trembled slightly. Salazar. Slytherin looked at her, and for a moment something softer flickered in his eyes. Regret, or exhaustion, or grief. Then it was gone. I have built a lock, Slytherin said. Ravenclaw's eyes widened just a fraction. A lock, she repeated softly. Gryffindor's voice went hard. Where? Slytherin's gaze lifted, and for a moment Harry felt it, Hogwarts remembering a secret it had been forced to swallow. Beneath, Slytherin said quietly. A boundary, a seam, a place where the castle touches what it should never touch. Hufflepuff's face went pale. Salazar, what have you done? Slytherin's voice was low. What you were too gentle to do, he said. What you were too proud to do. I have given Hogwarts a door that will not open unless it recognizes a certain kind of magic. Gryffindor rose to his feet, chair scraping. You built a door that chooses. Slytherin's eyes glittered. Yeah. Ravenclaw stood slowly, expression tight. A door that chooses is not a door, she said softly. It is a judge. Slytherin's gaze met hers. Then let it judge, he said. Hufflepuff stood too, hands trembling. And if it judges wrongly, she whispered. Slytherin's face hardened. Then the castle falls, he said simply. Either way. The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush breath. Harry felt sick. Gryffindor's voice was tight with fury. You cannot force a castle to carry your fear. Slytherin's mouth curled. I can, he said. And I have. Ravenclaw's gaze was sharp, almost pleading. Salazar, she said, if you place such a thing beneath us, it will remain. Even if you leave. Even if you leave. Even if you leave. Even if we forget it. The castle will remember. Slytherin's eyes flicked across the hall, across the students, across the torches. Let it, he said. Then, slowly, he reached into his robe and drew out a key. Harry's breath caught. It looked like the key on Dumbledore's desk. Slytherin held it up, and the torchlight caught the uneven teeth. This is the answer, Slytherin said quietly. A key that locks what should not open. Gryffindor's voice was rough. And what locks it, Salazar? Slytherin's gaze turned inward, cold and distant. Blood, he said softly. Scar. Burr. Mark. A wound in the soul that the door can recognize. Hufflepuff's face crumpled with horror. No, Ravenclaw's voice went sharp. You are building a lock that requires a wound. Slytherin's eyes flashed. Wounds are inevitable, he said. Better to use them than pretend they do not exist. Gryffindor's voice was dangerous. You are condemning children. Slytherin's expression did not flinch. I am condemning nothing, he said. I am preparing. Hufflepuff's voice broke. Salazar, please. For a heartbeat, Slytherin's face softened again, just a fraction. Then he closed his hand around the key. I am done arguing, he said, and as he spoke, the hall seemed to shiver. The torches flickered. The stone beneath Harry's feet hummed faintly, like a chord struck deep underground. Hogwarts, young, raw, new, was listening. Harry felt the memory tilt, shifting away from the hall and down, 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 like the castle's mind sinking into its own foundation. Stone corridors formed around him, crude and unfinished. He saw a black door being set into a frame, the stone around it still rough from carving. He saw hands pressing carvings into it, not with tools but with magic. He saw the seam of pale light appear for the first time, thin as a thread. He heard a whisper, faint, almost childish in its hunger, as if something on the other side had noticed the castle and leaned closer. And Harry realized with cold certainty the door had been a response, a lock built because something had already been pushing at the castle from below. The memory surged. Harry saw Slytherin alone in a deep corridor, wand raised, face pale with exhaustion. He pressed his palm to the door and spoke words that sounded like stone being promised to itself. His voice was low, furious, grieving. You will not open, Slytherin whispered. You will not feed. You will not speak to the children. The door pulsed. A whisper answered, faint, amused. Slytherin's jaw clenched. You will wait, he hissed. And you will take only what I allow. The whisper purred, pleased. The door's seam of light narrowed, and Harry, watching through Hogwarts' memory, felt the sickening truth settle into him like ice. Slytherin had not simply built a lock. He had built a bargain that relied on the existence of a certain kind of magic, a certain kind of wound, a hinge, a key, a scar. Harry's scar burned sharply, and the memory blurred. The torches became streaks of light. The stone corridor became a tunnel spinning. The whisper rose, not inside the memory, but inside Harry himself, soft and delighted. Now you understand. Harry tried to anchor, but the memory was pulling him like a current. He thought of the common room fire, but the image wavered. He thought of Ron and Hermione, but their faces slid away like water. The whisper deepened. Now you know why you fit. Harry felt panic surge. And then, a hand closed around his shoulder, steady and firm. A voice cut through the spinning dark, calm and absolute. Harry, Dumbledore. The memory snapped like a cord. Harry stumbled backward out of the pensieve, gasping, hands gripping the edge of the basin. The office rushed back into existence. Warm lamplight, ticking objects, portraits, Fawkes watching with bright stillness. Harry's scar burned like a brand. McGonagall was beside him instantly. Harry. Flitwick looked as if he might faint. Merlin. Snape's eyes were narrowed, sharp with grim satisfaction. So, he said quietly, it is exactly as I feared. Harry's breath came in short, ragged pulls. Slytherin, he managed. The door. He built it. But it wasn't just a lock. It was a bargain. It recognizes a wound. A scar. Dumbledore's face was very still. McGonagall's voice was tight with fury. Salazar Slytherin, she whispered, as if the name itself tasted like ash. Flitwick's hands trembled. A lock that needs a scar, he breathed. A key that... Snape's voice was low. A key that looks like Potter. Harry's stomach churned. Dumbledore picked up the ancient key from the desk and looked at it, eyes distant. Then he looked at Harry. "Now," Dumbledore said softly, "we know why Hogwarts offered it to us." Harry swallowed hard. "Because it thinks I'm the only one who can use it." Dumbledore's gaze was steady. "Yes," he said, "and that means we must be wiser than the castle's fear." Snape's mouth curled. "Or braver than its appetite." McGonagall's voice went sharp. "We are not using Harry as a key." Dumbledore's eyes did not leave Harry. "No," he agreed quietly. Harry's heart hammered. "Then what do we do?" Dumbledore's voice was calm, but the calm now carried the weight of decision. "We build a lock that does not require a wound," Dumbledore said softly. "We teach Hogwarts to choose without hunger." Flitwick swallowed. "Is that possible?" Dumbledore's gaze lifted toward the shelves, toward the portraits, toward the ceiling, as if he could see the whole castle at once. "It must be," he said. Harry's scar pulsed faintly, like a distant knock from far below. McGonagall's hand tightened on Harry's shoulder. "Albus," she said, voice fierce, "tell me you have a plan." Dumbledore looked at them all, and then, quietly, he said, "Yes." They did not leave at once. That was the first surprising thing. There was no sharp command, no sudden rush down spiraling staircases, no feeling of sprinting toward danger. Instead, Dumbledore created time where there seemed to be none, the way a hearth creates warmth even when winter presses its face against the window. He returned to his desk and placed the key down gently, as if it were only a common object, and not something that felt older than the castle itself. Harry, Ron, and Hermione stood near the hearth, close enough to feel the fire's steady breath. The flames crackled softly, a sound that would have been comforting on any other night. Even now, it offered something solid to hold on to, like a hand around your wrist when you're crossing a crowded street. Dumbledore's eyes moved between them with an odd kind of calm that did not ignore what was wrong, but refused to let wrongness set the pace. "You have all noticed," he said at last, "that Hogwarts has been unsettled." Hermione nodded quickly, as if she'd been waiting for the word. "The ceiling, the way it changes too fast. The temperature shifts in corridors that should be stable. The portraits, some of them keep forgetting what day it is. And the suits of armor are, well, they've been saluting students who aren't there." Ron swallowed. Also, the third-floor girl's loo made a noise like it was sighing." Hermione shot him a look. "What?" Ron insisted, cheeks pinking. "It did." Dumbledore's mouth twitched, like he was allowing himself one small corner of amusement before returning to the important thing. "Yes," he said quietly. "Hogwarts is speaking in its own way. And when a castle speaks, it is best not to pretend you cannot hear it." Harry shifted his weight, his skin prickling with that familiar sense of being pulled toward something he didn't understand. His life, he thought, had a habit of opening doors he hadn't meant to touch. "What's causing it?" he asked. Dumbledore did not answer immediately. Instead, he lifted his wand and made a tiny, precise motion. The office lights softened. The roaring green of the flames settled into a warmer gold, less fierce, more steady, like the fire itself had been asked to lower its voice. Then Dumbledore spoke. "Magic," he said, "is not always an explosion. It is often a balance, a rhythm, like breathing." Hermione's eyes flicked to Harry, then back to Dumbledore. She looked as though she was holding her own breath, without meaning to. "Hogwarts," Dumbledore continued, "was built upon ancient enchantments, some cast by the founders, some woven in by those who came after, some older still. The castle has adapted to generations of students, to wars and peace, to laughter and grief. It holds all of it. It remembers. The word remembers seemed to settle in the air like dust in sunbeams. And lately, Dumbledore said, Hogwarts has had more to remember than any home should. Harry thought of the great hall filled with fear, of the whispers, of corridors that had once felt like safety, then like traps, of names carved into stone, names he didn't want to think about. Ron stared into the fire, his jaw tight. Hermione's hands were clasped so hard her knuckles had gone pale. Dumbledore watched them all with something in his face that was not pity exactly, but understanding. The castle is not ill, he said. It is overloaded, like a room filled with too many echoes. When you speak in such a room, even a gentle word can become a shout. Hermione's voice came out softly, careful, so it's reacting. The ceiling, the wards, they're misfiring because the magic is carrying too much. In a manner of speaking, said Dumbledore, Hogwarts is trying to correct itself. But it is doing so without a steady hand. Ron frowned. Can't you just, steady it? Dumbledore's gaze moved to the small silver key on the desk. I can, he said, but not alone. Harry felt the words like a small shift in the floor beneath him. Not alone. Dumbledore turned towards them fully now, and the air seemed to sharpen, not with threat, but with importance. There is a place in Hogwarts, he said, that few have seen, fewer still have understood. It is not a chamber of secrets, as some might imagine. Yes. A chamber of foundation. The heartstone of the castle's enchantments. Hermione looked like she was about to interrupt herself with excitement and fear at the same time. You mean there's a nexus, Dumbledore supplied gently. Yes. A point where the oldest magic gathers. It is there that the rhythm of Hogwarts is set. Harry's mouth felt dry. And that rhythm is off. Dumbledore nodded. And you need us, Ron said, sounding incredulous. Because what? Because you need extra hands? Dumbledore's eyes softened again. Because the castle does not answer to authority alone, Mr. Weasley. It answers to belonging. A strange, quiet hush filled the office at that. Harry's chest tightened in a way he couldn't quite name. He thought of the first time he had stepped into the great hall, the candles floating overhead, the ceiling like a sky. He thought of the common room fire, the smell of old books, the way Hogwarts had felt, almost immediately, more like home than anywhere else. Belonging. Hermione swallowed. So, it needs people who are connected to it. Yes, Dumbledore said. Not merely students, but students who have left their mark. Ron gave a small, humorless snort. Brilliant. We've marked it up plenty. Hermione elbowed him. Bear. Dumbledore rose from his chair. If you are willing, he said, we will go now. Quietly. Carefully. Without drama, if we can manage it. Ron's eyebrows shot up. Without drama, in Hogwarts. For a moment, even Harry felt something loosen in him. A tiny thread of laughter that didn't quite reach the surface but softened the tightness anyway. Dumbledore picked up the key again. Come, he said. And just like that, they were moving. The spiral staircase carried them downward, and it did so with a steady patience, as if the castle itself had decided not to rush. The portraits they passed were dim and drowsy. A few opened one eye, saw Dumbledore, and immediately shut it again with the peace of someone who trusted him to handle whatever needed handling. The corridors were quieter than Harry had ever known them. Even the torches seemed to burn with less flicker, their flames holding still, as though listening. They descended farther than Harry expected, past floors that were familiar, past landings that felt less so, past a corridor where the stone looked older, the seams between blocks slightly wider, the air slightly cooler, like stepping into a part of the castle that remembered being young. Hermione kept glancing around, her eyes bright even in the dimness. It was the look she got when something complicated was unfolding in front of her, and she couldn't decide whether to be terrified or thrilled. Ron, on the other hand, had his wand out and was making muttering noises that sounded suspiciously like complaints disguised as bravery. Harry walked between them, feeling the steady presence of both like anchors. Dumbledore moved ahead, his robes barely brushing the stone. He didn't seem to need light. He seemed to carry it, subtly, like the air around him knew what to do. At last, they reached a stretch of wall that looked utterly ordinary. A plain stone corridor. A simple torch bracket. A small, almost unnoticeable crack in the mortar. Dumbledore stopped. He held the key up, and in the dim torchlight it gleamed. Not gold, not silver, but something in between, like moonlight that had learned how to become solid. He slid it into the crack. There was no keyhole, no obvious mechanism. But the moment the key touched the stone, the air shivered. A sound began. Not a clang, not a grinding, but a low, deep hum, like the castle clearing its throat. Then the wall opened, not by swinging outward, not by sliding sideways. It simply parted, the stone rippling as though it were water, remembering how to behave like stone again. Hermione's breath caught. Ron actually took a step back. Harry stared. Beyond the opening was a staircase that spiraled down into darkness, and the air that drifted up carried the faintest scent of earth and old oak, like the inside of a trunk that had been closed for 100 years. Dumbledore looked back at them. "Stay close," he said, and they went down. The staircase was narrow, the walls close enough that Harry could brush his fingers against the stone on either side if he wanted. The air grew cooler with every step, but it wasn't the sharp chill of winter. It was the coolness of cellars and deep lakes, the kind that felt steady rather than hostile. The torchlight from above faded quickly. Dumbledore lifted his wand, and a pale orb of light floated ahead of them, soft, not glaring. It illuminated the steps just enough, the way a bedside lamp illuminates a room without waking you fully. They descended for a long time. Harry couldn't have said how long. Time felt different here, as though the castle's deepest places did not measure minutes the way people did. Finally, the staircase ended at a door. Not a grand door, but not one covered in carvings or warnings. Just a door made of dark wood, plain and smooth, with a single iron handle. Dumbledore did not touch the handle immediately. He placed his palm against the wood. The door responded with a small sound, almost like a sigh. Ron's eyes widened. Did it just... "Listen," Hermione whispered, and for once her whisper was not excited. It was reverent. Harry listened. At first, there was nothing but the soft hum of Dumbledore's light and the faint sound of their own breathing. Then, beneath it all, Harry heard it. A pulse, not a heartbeat like a creature's. A heartbeat like a place. A slow, deep rhythm in the stone. A steady thrum that made the air feel slightly alive. Dumbledore lowered his hand and looked at them. "This," he said softly, is why I asked you here. The castle is not a thing apart from those who live within it. It is made of them, shaped by them. He reached for the handle. The door opened without resistance. The chamber beyond was not what Harry expected. It was not a cavern, not a vault. It was round, a wide circular room with a high domed ceiling, the stones smooth, as if it had been worn down by centuries of quiet. The walls were inlaid with faint lines of metal that formed patterns, spirals and loops and symbols that didn't look like runes Hermione had ever seen in books. They were older than language somehow, like the shape of thought. In the center of the room was a stone basin, shallow and wide, carved from a single piece of rock that looked almost black. It reflected Dumbledore's light with a dull sheen. Around the basin were 4 stone pillars, spaced evenly like the points of a compass. On each pillar was an emblem: a lion, a serpent, an eagle, a badger. Harry's throat tightened. The Founders. But it wasn't the house crests he knew from banners. These were simpler, older versions. Less polished. More like the first sketches of an idea. Hermione stepped forward slowly, eyes wide. This is incredible. Ron murmured, I feel like I should wipe my feet. Harry couldn't stop staring at the basin. Something in him wanted to step closer. Something in him wanted to step back. The air here felt aware. Dumbledore moved towards the basin and stood beside it. He held the silver key over the waterless stone. Then he did something Harry had never seen him do. He hesitated, just for a moment. Not from fear, from respect. This chamber, Dumbledore said quietly, does not obey force. It does not answer to someone simply because they have power. It answers to those who approach it with the right intent. Hermione's voice was barely audible. What do we do? Dumbledore looked at them in turn. We remind Hogwarts, he said, what it means to be a home. Harry swallowed. How? Dumbledore's gaze softened. By giving back to it, he said, what it has given to you. Ron frowned. Which is trauma and several near-death experiences. Hermione elbowed him again, but less sharply this time. Even she looked as though she might almost smile at the attempt. Dumbledore's eyes twinkled faintly. Not those parts, he said. Though I confess Hogwarts has had a flair for intensity. He gestured to the 4 pillars. Each of you, he said, will stand at one of the points. We will form a circle. We will let the chamber feel that the castle is not alone. Harry looked around. There are 4 pillars. Dumbledore nodded. And 4 of us? Ron blinked. Wait, you're joining? Dumbledore's smile was small. I am still a part of Hogwarts, Mr. Weasley. Even now. They moved into position. Hermione stood by the eagle pillar, her shoulders squared, her expression focused but tender. Ron went to the badger pillar, looking mildly panicked, but determined not to show it. Harry found himself standing by the lion, and something in his chest shifted at that, like an old warmth remembered. Dumbledore stood at the serpent. For a second, Harry found that strange. Then he realized it wasn't about houses. It was about balance. About all 4 pieces present, regardless of who stood where. The orb of light floated above the basin, gentle and steady. Dumbledore raised his wand. Now, he said softly, close your eyes if you can, or simply soften your gaze. Think of Hogwarts, not as a place of trials, but as a place that held you. Harry's fingers tightened around his wand. Close his eyes, in the middle of something unknown. But Dumbledore's voice was calm, and the chamber was quiet, and Ron was beside his pillar with an expression that said, "If I can do it, you can too." So Harry let his gaze drop. He didn't fully close his eyes, but he let the room blur a little at the edges, and he thought. He thought of the first time he'd sat at the Gryffindor table, feeling as though the ceiling sky might swallow him with wonder. He thought of the common room fire, of laughing so hard his ribs hurt. He thought of the library with Hermione's hair bent over parchment, of Ron's grin when something went right, of quiet nights when the castle felt like it was breathing with him. He thought of footsteps in corridors that had once frightened him, then comforted him, then frightened him again, and of how, even then, the castle had still been the place where he had learned what family felt like. He did not think of the darkest things, or rather, he let them be there, at the edges, without stepping into them. He focused on warmth, on belonging, on the way a home can be imperfect and still be home. As Harry held that thought, he felt something strange. The air in the chamber warmed by a fraction of a degree, not from the orb of light, from within the stone itself. Hermione's breath hitched softly, like she'd felt it too. Ron let out a long, slow exhale, the sort of exhale someone makes when they didn't realize they were holding their breath. Dumbledore's voice floated across the circle. "Good," he murmured. "Now, let your magic rest in that feeling. Not pushed, not forced, simply present." Harry didn't know how to let his magic rest exactly. Magic usually meant doing something, saying a spell, making something happen, aiming, but he tried. He loosened his grip on his wand slightly. He let his shoulders drop. He imagined his magic like warmth in his chest, like a small, steady candle rather than a bolt of lightning. The hum beneath the floor grew clearer. The basin in the center of the room began to change. At first it only looked less empty, as if the stone had become slightly glossy. Then, slowly, like morning creeping into a room through curtains, something appeared in it. Not water, not memories. Light. A pale, shimmering surface, like moonlight turned liquid. Hermione made a soft, reverent sound. Ron whispered, "Blimey." Harry stared. The light in the basin was not dramatic. It didn't flare. It didn't burst. It simply arrived. And as it arrived, the strange lines in the walls, those ancient patterns, began to glow faintly too, like veins remembering they were meant to carry something. The chamber felt steadier, but still, beneath it, Harry sensed the wrongness. A subtle wobble, like a song being played just slightly out of tune. Dumbledore's voice came again, even softer now. "Hogwarts has carried fear," he said. "It has carried grief. It has carried anger. Those things too leave residue. And when too much residue gathers, the castle's rhythm falters." Harry felt his throat tighten. He remembered corridors where he'd run, panting, heart hammering. He remembered the feeling of being watched. He remembered loss. The basin's light rippled faintly, as if responding to the heaviness. Dumbledore continued, "We do not deny those memories. We do not erase them. We simply help the castle place them gently where they belong." Hermione's voice trembled. "How?" Dumbledore lifted his wand slightly higher. "We give the castle a new anchor," he said. A promise. Not that darkness will never come again. No home can promise that. But that light is still here. That people still belong. That there is still kindness in these stones. Ron's voice came out rougher than usual. And you want us to promise that? Yes, said Dumbledore. Harry swallowed. He felt something building in him. Not panic, not fear. Something else. A quiet determination. Dumbledore spoke again, and now his tone shifted slightly. Still gentle, but more precise. When I say the words, he said, you will each speak a simple spell, not a complicated one, not a powerful one, in the usual sense. It will not strike, or bind, or break. It will offer. Hermione nodded once, firmly, like she was choosing to trust her own steadiness. Ron looked uncertain, then glanced at Harry and Hermione and seemed to decide he wasn't going to be the one who backed away. Harry drew in a slow breath. Dumbledore said, "On my count." He paused, as if listening to the castle's pulse. Then he spoke quietly. 1. The hum deepened. 2. The basin's surface brightened slightly, like it was becoming more receptive. The hum deepened. 3. Dumbledore said clearly and softly, "Now," and all at once they spoke. Lumos. Hermione's voice was steady, the spell clean and precise. Lumos, Ron echoed, his voice a little rough but earnest. Harry said it too, and as he did, he felt his wand respond, not with a sharp beam, but with a warm glow. 4 lights, 4 simple lights, pointed toward the basin, and the basin responded. The liquid moonlight in it brightened, and for a moment, images flickered across its surface, so quick they were more felt than seen. A first-year's face lit by candlelight. A group of friends laughing in a corridor. A teacher's hand steadying a trembling student. A snowy window in a common room, firelight beyond. Then the images softened and faded, leaving only the light. The hum beneath the floor shifted, not fully right yet, but closer. Dumbledore lowered his wand slightly, watching, listening, feeling.
It is working.
He murmured. Hermione's breath came out in a whisper. It's like we're tuning it. Yes, said Dumbledore. Like tuning an instrument, like guiding a heartbeat back to its proper rhythm. Harry felt a strange pressure behind his eyes, and he blinked hard. He didn't want to cry. He wasn't sure why he wanted to. But something about standing here, about the castle responding not to battle but to gentleness, made his chest ache in a way that wasn't painful, exactly. More like relief, trying to find a place to go. Then the chamber shuddered. Not violently, just enough to make the orb of light wobble. The basin's surface rippled sharply. Ron tensed. Professor? Dumbledore's face remained calm, but his eyes sharpened. Yes, he said softly. There it is. The knot. Hermione's voice was thin. The knot. The place where fear has gathered too tightly, Dumbledore said. The part of Hogwarts that has been trying to correct itself but cannot, because the memory is clamped too hard. Harry's heart beat faster. The hum beneath the floor became uneven, a stutter in the rhythm, like a song catching on a wrong note. Dumbledore lifted his wand again. This is the delicate part, he said. We will not push. We will not force. We will simply loosen. Hermione swallowed. How do we loosen something like that? Dumbledore looked around the circle. With the opposite of fear, he said. Ron made a small, helpless sound. Which is... Dumbledore's gaze met Harry's for a moment, and Harry felt, strangely, that Dumbledore was asking him to understand rather than instructing him to obey. Then Dumbledore said, trust, comfort, love, if you are willing to call it that. Oh. Hermione's eyes shone. Ron's jaw tightened again, and Harry realized Ron was fighting not fear, but something more complicated. The fear of feeling too much. Harry understood that. He understood it more than he wanted to. The basin's surface rippled again, and this time the light inside it dimmed slightly at the edges, like a shadow trying to creep back in. Dumbledore's voice softened further, becoming almost like a lullaby in the stone. Think, he said, of a moment Hogwarts gave you comfort. Harry's mind flashed unbidden to the hospital wing. The white sheets, the smell of potions, the way sunlight had sometimes fallen across the beds. He remembered waking up bruised and exhausted, and seeing Hermione asleep in a chair beside him, Ron nearby, pretending he wasn't worried. Madame Pomfrey fussing like annoyance was her way of caring. He remembered safety. He held that memory gently, like a warm cup between his hands. Hermione, Harry sensed, was thinking of something too. Her face had softened, her shoulders dropping slightly, as if she was remembering a quiet place in the library where she'd once felt clever instead of lonely. Ron's eyes were squeezed shut, his lips pressed together, as if he was remembering something and trying not to let it spill out of him. The hum beneath the floor began to smooth. The basin's surface steadied. The shadow at the edges hesitated. Dumbledore spoke again, and now there was a careful rhythm to his words, like he was guiding their breathing without telling them to breathe. Now, he said, let that comfort move outward, not as a command, as an offering. Harry imagined warmth spreading through stone, not dramatically, not like fire, but like sunlight soaking into a windowsill. The basin brightened again, slowly. The chamber's patterns glowed, and then, softly, the shudder returned. One last tremor, like the castle releasing a tight muscle. The hum, underfoot, shifted into something that felt right. Not perfect, perhaps, not final, but right enough that Harry's shoulders dropped without him deciding to drop them. Hermione let out a small breath that sounded like she'd been holding herself together with string and had finally loosened it. Ron opened his eyes and stared at the basin, blinking hard. The light in the basin did something beautiful. It didn't flare. It didn't explode. It simply became steady, smooth as glass, bright as dawn. And in that steadiness, Harry felt the castle around them, above them, settle, not into silence, but into peace. Dumbledore lowered his wand fully. For a long moment, none of them spoke, because speaking felt like something that might disturb the quiet kindness of what had just happened. Then, softly, Hermione whispered, "It's like it was, holding its breath." "Yes," Dumbledore said. Ron's voice came out hoarse. "So now it can breathe again." Dumbledore's eyes crinkled, precisely. Harry stared at the basin, at the steady light, and felt an odd certainty bloom in him. Hogwarts was not just stone and spells. It was every student who had ever walked its corridors. Every laugh, every tear, every whispered secret, every apology, every late-night cup of tea in a common room. It had held them, and now, for a moment, they had held it. But even as that thought warned him, Harry felt something else, something faint and lingering. A tug, like a thread still not fully tied off. Dumbledore sensed it too. His expression shifted just slightly. "We have steadied the rhythm," he said, "but there is one more thing." Hermione's brow furrowed. "One more thing." Dumbledore looked at the silver key in his hand. "The castle has calmed," he said, "but the sky above the Great Hall will still remember how to storm." Harry's stomach dipped. Ron groaned softly. "Of course it will." Dumbledore's smile returned, mild and tired. "It is not enough to soothe the heart," he said. "We must also soothe the face the castle shows to those inside it." Hermione's voice was cautious. "So, we need to adjust the ceiling enchantment too?" "In a sense," Dumbledore said, "but not by fiddling with the ceiling itself, by giving the Great Hall something it has been missing." Harry's throat tightened. "What's that?" Dumbledore's gaze lifted, as though he could see all the way up through stone and floors and corridors to the vast hall above. "Hope," he said softly, "not as a grand idea, as a small, daily thing." He turned, and the orb of light drifted toward the door, ready to guide them back. "We will go up," Dumbledore said, "and we will give Hogwarts a simple picture to hold on to, one that reminds it of peace." Ron rubbed his face with one hand. "And how do we do that?" Dumbledore's eyes twinkled again, but this time the twinkle had a weight behind it, like he had earned the right to be gentle because he had already seen too much. "We will do it," he said, "the way Hogwarts has always done its best work." Hermione tilted her head. "Which is?" Dumbledore opened the door, and the cool air from the staircase brushed against them. "Together," he said. And they stepped out, beginning their climb back toward the sleeping castle above, toward the great hall ceiling that had learned to storm too quickly, and that now, at last, might learn how to be calm again. The staircase back up felt different. Not brighter, exactly, but lighter. As they climbed, Harry kept expecting the castle to snap back into its usual noise. Some portrait shouting, a suit of armor clanking, Peeves drifting around a corner with a rude song ready on his lips. But none of that happened. Hogwarts remained quiet, as if it were listening to its own breathing and finding it soothing. The stones under Harry's feet felt warmer than before, even through the soles of his shoes. The air no longer had that faint metallic tang that had been lingering in the corridors all week, like thunder trapped behind plaster. Hermione noticed too. Harry could tell by the way she kept pausing, just for half a second, tilting her head as though she could hear the castle's pulse, smoothing into steadiness. Ron was quieter than usual. That alone was enough to tell Harry that whatever they had done in the chamber had touched him more deeply than he wanted to admit. Ron's face looked set and stubborn, but his eyes had that glassy brightness that comes from being close to something tender and trying not to flinch away. Dumbledore led them without hurry. Each step seemed chosen to keep the calm from breaking. At last they reached the corridor again, the one with the plain wall that wasn't plain at all. Dumbledore slid the silver key back into the crack in the stone. The wall rippled and sealed, becoming ordinary in a blink, as though it had never opened. The hum that had been beneath their feet faded into the background, not gone, but settled, like a heartbeat you stop noticing because it has finally become safe to trust it. Dumbledore placed the key into his pocket. Then he turned and began walking toward the great hall. "Professor," Hermione said quietly, catching up to him, "you said the ceiling will still remember how to storm." Dumbledore nodded. "The enchanted ceiling," he said, "is not merely an imitation of the sky. It is a mirror. It reflects what Hogwarts feels, and lately Hogwarts has felt too much." Ron muttered. "Join the club." Dumbledore's mouth twitched. "Indeed. Harry's gaze drifted upward as they walked. He imagined the great hall ceiling above them like a great canvas, responding too quickly, too sharply, clouds gathering in seconds, stars vanishing without warning, the sudden heaviness of rain that wasn't rain but still made people shiver. Harry had seen fear ripple through students when the ceiling changed, even when no one said the word fear. He'd felt it himself, the sense that if the castle could not keep its own sky steady, then perhaps nothing was steady at all. They reached the doors to the great hall. The hall beyond was empty now. Dinner had long since finished, and the students had retreated to their common rooms. Only a few candles remained lit, floating above the tables in lazy, sleepy lines. The ceiling above was not calm. It was not raining, but thick clouds roiled there, sluggish and dark, as if they were waiting for something to push them into a storm. Every few seconds, a low flicker of lightning bloomed and died behind the clouds, silent but unsettling. Hermione stopped just inside the doors, her breath catching. It's worse than earlier. Ron stared upward. It's like it's stuck. Harry felt the familiar prickling at the back of his neck, that sense of wrongness in a place that should feel safe. Dumbledore stepped forward into the center of the hall. He looked very small beneath the vast ceiling, but there was nothing small in the way he stood, straight-backed, steady, like someone who had decided to be a lighthouse, whether the sea liked it or not. He turned to them. Hogwarts has steadied, he said softly. Now we must teach the Great Hall to follow. Hermione's voice was hushed, as if she didn't want the ceiling to hear her too sharply. How? Dumbledore glanced at the 4 house tables. Long ago, he said, the Great Hall was designed for more than meals. It was meant to be a place where the castle could witness togetherness, where the rhythm of community could remind Hogwarts what it was built to shelter. Ron frowned. So, we eat a big meal and hope the sky behaves. Dumbledore's eyes twinkled, but his voice remained gentle. Not quite, he said, but you are closer than you think. He walked toward the staff table and lifted his wand. With a small, precise movement, he caused more candles to ignite, hundreds of them, floating higher, spreading out until the whole glowed with a warm, honey-colored light. The shadows pulled back from the corners. The ceiling still churned, but the hall below it felt less helpless. Dumbledore returned to the center. Stand with me, he said. Not at your house tables, here. He indicated a spot near the middle of the room, between the Gryffindor and Hufflepuff tables, where the stone floor was worn smooth by generations of passing feet. Harry moved first, stepping into place beside Dumbledore. Hermione came next, her expression focused but soft. Ron followed, hands shoved into his pockets as though he could hide his nerves that way. They stood together, 4 figures beneath a storm that wasn't real but still felt heavy. Dumbledore spoke quietly. When a sky is unstable, he said, we do not fight it with force. We remind it what it is meant to be. Hermione swallowed. So we show it calm. Yes, Dumbledore said. And to show calm, we must be calm. Harry's heart thudded. It sounded simple. But calm wasn't always something you could choose. Not after everything calm could be slippery. Calm could feel like an illusion that might break if you touched it. Dumbledore's voice softened even further, and it seemed to fill the hall with steadiness. Close your eyes, he said, or lower your gaze. Let your breathing slow. Think of a sky you have trusted. Ron made a small sound like he wanted to protest, then didn't. Harry lowered his gaze to the stone floor. He tried to picture A sky he trusted. The first image that came to him surprised him. Not the summer sky above Privet Drive, because those skies had never felt like his. Not the grey London sky, either. He pictured the sky over the Hogwarts grounds, on a morning when everything had been still, when mist had clung to the lake, and the world had felt soft and quiet. He pictured sunrise over the Black Lake, pale gold spreading slowly, patiently, turning the water into something like molten glass. He held that image in his mind, like a warm pebble in his palm. Beside him, Hermione's breathing slowed. Harry could almost feel her thoughts settling into order, the way they always did when she decided not to panic. Ron's breath came unevenly at first, then steadied. Harry didn't look at him, but he sensed Ron picturing something too, perhaps the sky above the burrow at dusk, when the garden glowed and the windows warmed, and everything felt like it would be all right as long as you were together. Dumbledore's voice came again, barely louder than the candle flames. "Now," he said, "offer that sky to the hall." Hermione's brow furrowed. "Offer it how?" Dumbledore lifted his wand slightly. "Not with complexity," he said. "With sincerity." He paused. Then he spoke clearly, but softly. So softly the hall itself seemed to lean in to listen. "On my count," he said. 1. The air in the great hall shifted. Harry felt it in his skin, like a gentle pressure change before rain. 2. The candles flickered, then steadied again, as if holding their breath with them. 3. Dumbledore said, "Now." And together they spoke. Lumos. 4 simple lights bloomed, not harsh beams, but warm glows. They aimed their wands upward toward the ceiling. The storm clouds above did not vanish immediately. Instead, the ceiling reacted like something startled awake by kindness. The clouds paused. The slow churn hesitated, as if the enchantment had been expecting fear, expecting tension, and had been met with something different. The lightning flickered once, then stopped. The clouds began to thin at the edges, not ripped apart, but softened. Harry stared upward, feeling his chest tighten with a sudden, strange hope. Hermione whispered, "It's responding." Ron muttered, "About time." But the ceiling wasn't fully calm yet. A darker knot of cloud remained in the center, heavier than the rest, like a bruise that didn't want to fade. The air around it felt colder. Harry felt that tug again, the lingering thread from the chamber below, something not fully released. Dumbledore's face turned thoughtful as he watched the knot. "That," he murmured, "is the part that remembers too sharply." Hermione's voice trembled. "Is it remembering the war?" Dumbledore did not answer directly, but his eyes softened. "It is remembering fear," he said quietly. "Fear in large rooms. Fear under high ceilings. Fear that pressed down and made people feel small." Harry's throat tightened. He remembered standing in the great hall when everything had been wrong. He remembered how the air had felt too heavy. How the candles had seemed too bright. How even the ceiling had seemed like it was watching. He felt Ron shift slightly beside him, as though he'd remembered something too. Hermione swallowed, her eyes glistening. Dumbledore lowered his wand. "The enchanted ceiling is a mirror," he said, "and it will not heal if we pretend nothing happened." Ron's voice came out rough. "So what do we do?" Dumbledore's gaze moved from Harry to Hermione to Ron. "We do what you have already done," he said softly. "We bring truth into the room, gently, and then we bring comfort beside it. Harry didn't fully understand until Dumbledore said the next words. "Speak," he said. "Not spells, words." Hermione blinked. "Words, yes," said Dumbledore. "The oldest magic is not always wand work. Sometimes it is simply being heard." The candles floated, steady and warm. The hall waited. Harry felt his heart hammering. Speak? About what? About everything he tried not to think about? But Dumbledore's calm made it feel possible, like the floor beneath him would hold. Hermione spoke first, her voice soft but clear. "Hogwarts," she said. And Harry felt foolishly startled by hearing her address the castle, as if it were a person. But in that moment it didn't feel foolish. It felt right. "Hogwarts," Hermione said again. "We know you're carrying too much. You don't have to hold it alone." The knot of cloud above trembled faintly, as if listening. Ron shifted, then spoke, his voice low. "Yeah," he said awkwardly. You, you, you kept us safe, even when things were awful. You did your best." Harry swallowed hard. He looked up at that dark knot of cloud and felt something pull in his chest like a hook. He spoke before he could stop himself. "I was scared," Harry said quietly, his voice echoing in the empty hall. "I was scared so many times here, but this was still the place that felt like home." The words hung in the air. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the knot of cloud above them shifted. Not violently, like a fist unclenching. The darkness thinned at the edges. A faint patch of lighter sky appeared behind it. Hermione made a soft sound, like relief. Dumbledore's voice came, gentle as candlelight. "Again," he said. "Not forcing, just offering." Hermione's voice shook now, but she didn't pull away from it. "Hogwarts," she whispered. "You gave us friendships. You gave us knowledge. You gave us places to hide when we needed to be brave." Ron's throat bobbed as he swallowed. "You gave us family," he said. Harry blinked hard. He didn't want to cry in the Great Hall, but tears weren't always weakness. Sometimes they were the body letting go of what it had been gripping too hard. "I want you to be peaceful again," Harry said, voice hoarse. "I want students to look up and see stars, not storms." The knot of cloud shuddered. Then, slowly, like fog lifting from a field, it began to dissolve. Not disappearing into nothing, but transforming. The darkness softened into grey. The grey lightened into pale silver. The silver thinned until it became scattered wisps, and behind it the ceiling revealed a sky. A real sky mirrored from outside, clear, deep, and full of stars. They emerged one by one, gentle pinpricks of light, as if the night itself was being patient enough to return slowly. Ron let out a shaky breath. "Blimey!" Hermione's eyes shone. Her lips pressed together like she was trying not to smile too wide for fear of breaking it. Harry stared up at the stars and felt something inside him settle, like a piece of himself had been waiting for the sky to look like this again. Dumbledore lowered his wand completely. The candles hummed softly in the air. The great hall felt warm, not just from light, but from something deeper, like the room had remembered that it had once been built for feasts and laughter and stories that lasted long after dessert. For a long moment, none of them moved. Then Dumbledore spoke, his voice very quiet. That is better, he said. Not perfect, but better. Hermione wiped her cheek quickly, as if she hadn't meant for the tears to arrive. Ron rubbed the back of his neck, pretending he wasn't emotional. So, that's it then. We just talk to the ceiling? Dumbledore's eyes twinkled. In a manner of speaking, he said. And in doing so, you reminded the castle that it is loved. Harry's throat tightened again. Loved. The word felt dangerous and safe at the same time. They stood beneath the calm sky for a few more breaths, letting the stillness sink into them. Then Dumbledore turned toward the doors. Come, he said. It is late, and Hogwarts, now that it can breathe again, will wish you to rest. As they walked toward the exit, Harry glanced back one last time. The ceiling held steady. Stars glittered softly. No sudden storm. No lightning. Just night. Quiet and endless and gentle. And for the first time in what felt like a long time, Harry believed, truly believed, that Hogwarts could be peaceful again, not because nothing bad would ever happen, but because even after darkness, the castle could still learn how to hold the light. They stepped out into the corridor. The great hall doors closed behind them, with a soft thud that sounded almost like a settled sigh. And above, in the heart of the school, a sky remained calm, patiently, kindly waiting for the next day to begin.